gonna go ahead and hit the little red button.
Okay.
So, whenever we're ready.
Okay. You hit the red button?
Oh, it's hit. It been hit for like 15
It's been
seconds
hit?
now.
Oh, damn. All right. Well, welcome anyone listening to the first episode of a podcast that currently does not have a name. It's to be decided.
Whoa, whoa,
Uh,
whoa, whoa. We don't have a name yet?
no, we don't really have a name yet. But topics for this one, obviously, since probably been done a million times so far, but it hasn't been done by us yet. So this
True.
will be the first time for that. Uh, First of all, we're going to go through each of the teams in the CDL. So each 12, we're going to look at the players on the roster, the substitutes, and the coaching staff behind them, since that does matter. And then from that, we'll give our opinions on where we think those teams will end up by the end of the season. So this is more of kind of the lowest potential of the team to the highest potential of the team and not just where they're currently at. This is kind of trying to predict all the way through to the end of the season where these teams will end up with the players that they currently have. Because there is no, to my knowledge, there is no roster change period throughout this entire season. So this is the team you have. This is the team you'll have for the entire year, and that's how it will stay.
Yeah, I think that's a good summation of what we want to do. And as a bonus, we're gonna go ahead and go over who we have in the matchups coming up next weekend in Minnesota. So we have all the matchups listed, and Nick and I are definitely gonna go over it and have a little debate on who do we think is gonna come out on top.
Yep. So I guess we'll start alphabetically. So
Have
we'll
to.
start with the Atlanta Phase
FaZe Clan.
roster. Yes, somehow they were able to get their name in there, even though they exist in other esports spaces. So I would love to know. I think it has something to do with the Z, or no, it has something to do with its Phase Clan, and this is just Phase. So
Honestly,
very fine print there that they were able to do that. But I'm happy that we have Phase Clan in the CDL since they do bring a lot of history with some rivalries and their staff, and so that's really good.
yeah, they're one of the original content creators they've been a really, really successful esports organization as well. I mean, their reputation precedes them.
Yep. And with this roster, I say they are in a pretty good spot to do a lot this year. So in the
Absolutely.
coaching position, they have Crowder, assistant coaches RJ, who was the coach last year for the Phase team, and then analyst Easy Mac. Not too familiar with him, but I imagine he also came from the was also with Phase Clan
Yeah,
last year
I'm sure he was with
in the
FaZe.
Call of Duty World League as at an analyst position. Their players, Abizi, Simp, Celium, Major Maniac, Priesta, with substitutes Journey and Gravity. So the
Jeez.
first thing that I see with this roster is an extremely young roster. Uh,
Young and stacked. Oh my
yes,
gosh. Simp, player of the year last year. Rookie of the year last year. Took E United, who had almost all of it, and just put them in that next level. I mean, the kid is absolutely unreal. Just and even now with the scrims that are coming out, every time I see Simp, everybody's keyed on Simp. Every team has to know where Simp is, and they will like. There's been many times in like Petrograd, for example, where the team is just like struggling to find where Simp is. Like that's how big of a game changer he is, and he's
yeah,
just
and
one person.
I don't. Yeah, and he's one person on a roster of five really good players. And another player I do want to point out on this roster is Celium.
So
Celium came in last year, kind of halfway. Not actually halfway. He was there at the start. He was on that Phase Clan roster that unfortunately was unable to qualify for the Pro League. But then he eventually found himself back on Phase in the Pro League after a couple of interesting dealings and selling of uh, Call of Duty World League slots last year. But Simp praised Celium, I remember, for how good he was in Call of Duty World War II. And so this game being another kind of more similar, I would say, to that than Black Ops 4 was, I'm very interested to see how well Celium will perform in this game.
oh yeah,
Another interesting fact is out of all the players, he actually had the highest overall kill to death ratio of his teammates on this roster from the pro league last year.
which I mean
Uh,
is kind of crazy thinking that he's on a roster with Simp and Priesta and Major Maniac and Abizi. Speaking of Priesta, Priesta and Crowder have finally come back from loan from 100 Thieves. Unfortunately, 100 Thieves did not get a contract bid for a team. Crowder was a coach for it, and Priesta was the player on loan. He took over the Ruin Sog sort of position and played absolutely out of his mind most of the time. Um, Crowder brings a really, really good lens, brings a lot of good perspectives, and I think he's probably one of the best coaches in Call of Duty right now. It's really good. It's really good to see them back on Phase. I think Phase, because of those two, are going to have a little bit more of a 100D's fan base outreach, and I personally think that Crowder and Priesta are belong in Phase and are going to be a really, really huge part of this team moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, they were major players in kind of turning that 100 Thieves roster around. They
Yes.
almost didn't qualify for the Pro League when they had Pharaoh, and Priesta came in, pushing Pharaoh out of that starting lineup, and they brought in Crowder to help coach. And immediately they started climbing, and they made it all the way up to second at champs and a bunch of second place finishes, and actually a first place finish last year at one of the tournaments. Or they did it.
No, they did it back to back.
They did it back to back, yeah,
Back to back,
at
and then
two.
went to champs, and then they got second to E United, which honestly, like that was a great performance by them. They couldn't have done any better. It was just E United was completely stacked, and Simp was a huge part of that. It still is a huge accomplishment. That 100 Thieves team was very, very good, and I'm glad to see that all of the players on that team are have found good homes.
Yep. And so this roster with the roles is kind of one of, I think, the most flexible rosters. I mean, Celium's most likely going to be an AR 100% of the time. And then you have a BZ in the SMG role, but the other three players are pretty flexible in their gun profile. I mean, at times,
Yeah, I
uh,
I think they cover a lot of the bases and what the strategy is right now moving forward. There's maps like Arcloth Peep, Search and Destroy, where we want four ARs or one three ARs and a sniper even. There's maps like Hackney Hardpoint where they're pushing four SMGs at sometimes. So it's nice to have that kind of flexibility and have that level of detail that you can put into each hill and each bomb plant and each defend. So that is a huge, huge, huge point in the direction of phase.
and one other thing is like all these players are so young. I think they have a similar mindset. All of them kind of think the same way, which I would compare this roster to kind of like what G2 Esports was in League of Legends last year. A bunch of players that all have like kind of the same mindset, uh, same like aggressive mindset of how they want to play the game, and it just mixes really well together. And they can kind of just, I picture this team kind of probably just rolling over a bunch of teams at least throughout probably the majority of the year.
Yeah,
And
I
at this
100%
point,
agree.
like we've only seen Hardpoint and Dom, and they've been dominating in that. And we haven't even started to see the Search and Destroy yet, which Search and Destroy is probably this team's biggest weapon. You got Simp and Celium, both who are like known S&D players. And then you also have Major Maniac, who has a bit of an S&D background before he came up into the pro scene a lot. And one of the stats like that I see like currently on this sheet is you look in the Search and Destroy column, I have something for first blood, first death. And that means the number of times they're getting first blood over the number of times that they're dying first. And they actually have the best ratio out of any team in this category by a significant margin. I think it's by
Jeez.
like point 0.5, by a full point 0.5 of a ratio, which is almost like doubling.
No, no,
Not really doubling, but
I think this is a really, really important stat to consider because Simpcillium and Major Maniac both are like they're all out of this world in the first blood, first death stat. Priesta's a little bit lower than the 1.0 average that we're seeing across the board, but you also have to consider that Priesta, while being a little bit below, is usually the objective player, and especially during Black Ops 4, he's almost exclusively the bomb carrier just because he was a ruin sog. He could get across the map really, really fast. He could do the rush plan if he needed to, and carrying a .97 first blood first death is first guy going into the hill is still insane. So I mean, I think that speaks volumes on itself as well. Other things of note is while we do have this other stat, the other stat that a lot of people talk about with the kill deaths, Sip carried a 136 in Search and Destroy, Celium carried a 140, a BC carried a 117, and Major Maniac and Priest both carried 111. So that's significantly positive in the CWL world. I think they're going to do fine in Search and Destroy. This is a little bit slower than Black Ops 4 as far as Search and Destroy goes, but honestly, they could turn on the Jets at any time. I mean, they could push B Dom or sorry, B bomb on Arklov and be there in 15 seconds, and all of a sudden be set up in a small house where a lot of these guys are super successful in. And what do you do at that point? So I think this is definitely going to be a pretty successful search and destroy team as well. I'm very high on Atlanta Faith.
Yep. And I mean, some of these numbers will obviously decrease since they were probably the standout players on the teams that they were on. All these players were, and so I mean, you put a bunch of all stars on a team, they're not all going to be a standout player, obviously, on the team. That's just not how it's going to work. And so, since it is a team game, their stats aren't all going to be as high, but I think they'll be working together quite well and winning a lot.
I'm pretty excited for him, and a bunch of superstars has worked in a lot of different sports, and Call of Duty is definitely one of them, which is why I'd like to transition over to the next team, the Chicago Huntsmen. Talk about superstars on that team.
The old optic, new optic,
Oh my
Hex's optic.
gosh, Hex's Optic,
Uh,
the old guard, whatever you want to call it. Chicago
yeah,
Huntsmen is absolutely filthy. So they have a couple of staff up top with Cinder and X Tupac as the coach and the analyst. But aside from those guys, let's really talk about the players because that's what everybody wants to hear about anyway. You got Scump, the king. You've got Formal, one of the greatest players to ever play the game. RC's and Envoy, who both came off an insane Black Ops 4 season, and Gunless as well. A lot of chemistry here, a lot of really, really good duos, and superstar in the making in Envoy. I'm curious to hear what else you have to say, Nick, because this team is just lights out in my opinion.
yeah. I think definitely the best player from last year on this roster is Envoy, just without a doubt. I mean, sorry, all the Scump fans or any of the other fans, but Envoy was definitely the best player last year to come onto this roster. And I think he brings kind of a different mindset from the other players. I think he has one of those younger, fresher mindsets to the game that really helps with being able to adapt to the new cycles of the games and kind of push this team forward. Whereas, like Atlanta FaZe, they're all really young and they're all kind of figuring the game out in their own way and pushing the meta forward. Envoy, I feels like that kind of player for the Huntsman. And I mean, you have a bunch of really good players on this roster. I think the one thing I'm worried about is like the personalities and kind of being in the limelight. You have players like Gunless and Formal who kind of are very keep to themselves and they like to kind of practice with the team, do their thing, and then have their extra time to themselves. And so I don't know if this kind of the way that Hex likes to run the team with being in the limelight and having all this content around them is really going to benefit the team with kind of these players on it. And I
Yeah,
mean,
I honestly you took
I kind of felt that from watching the campaign a bit already. I mean,
exactly that. I was
you
about to bring
see
up the
like some of the
campaign.
players feel out of place during it.
Well, you have to consider that aside from Scump and partially Formal, none of these guys have really been on a team where the content has been a focus. You have FaZe, you have Optic, and you had 100 Ds last year who focused a lot on the content. And you had to think about the players and the well more like the ownership that's involved with that. Hector Hex who ran Optic before, trained his protege Nade Shot to bring up 100 Ds, and FaZe has been one of those that's always been a content first company. That's something that you could already tell NRG wanted out of Hex, and they're really, really trying to push content right now. And you're right, Gunless and Formal don't want anything to do with this. You can tell very obviously in the campaign. Formal was very short with him whenever they came out to Southern California to visit him. He's not even with the team. The rest of the team has moved to Texas, including Envoy now.
Yeah,
They
I
can
believe
practice.
Gunless and Arcides were already there since they're roommates.
They
No.
did move there earlier, so basically
Okay.
as soon as champs ended, a lot of the roster mania stuff happened unofficially, and RCDs and Gunless were like, "Hey, we're a package deal. We're moving out as a team to wherever they need to go." I'm sure that Hex got a hold of that and was like, let me see. Oh, you guys were just COD champs, and you guys are looking for a home, and we need two. Hmm. Right now we have Scump and Formal. Like it's just a no-brainer. It really is. Like RCs and Gunless are absolutely disgusting at what they do. They have perfect chemistry with each other, even more than RCs and his twin brother Preston. It's it's kind of absurd that we're not seeing them for the first time on the same team, but I really do think that RCs and Gunless still have a lot of chemistry together that will promote this team to, that next tier. I think Scump is going to get the job done regardless. I know his stats weren't that great in Black Ops 4, and his stats were god awful in World War II. But I don't think Scump's fallen off yet. His performance in Champs was bar none. He was one of the best players at Champs last year. Sucks that the rest of his team didn't show up on COD Champ Sunday, but he definitely came into play, and he looks fine. Formal is still one of the best players in Call of Duty. He continues to be one of the best players in Call of Duty, and I am just not sure at what point that Formal is going to stop being relevant. And like you said, Envoy before. I mean, kid is lights out. He's a wonder kid. I wouldn't be surprised if he got like Player of the Year this year, if Chicago Huntsmen are really who they're setting out to be.
Yeah. I mean, I think it looks like a good roster. Stat wise, everything looks fine. Haven't seen too much from them in terms of S&D. That might be one thing could be a little worrying, I think, for the Chicago Huntsmen. I think any of the respawn game modes, I think they'll be fine in. I think my biggest concern with this roster, honestly, is going to be chemistry and kind of the mentality throughout the season. But I do think it won't be as big of an issue. They have General as a substitute. He wasn't amazing in World War II, but he was pretty good last year. It's a little different, but I think having him as a substitute could really help them out. I know probably last year Optic or 2 years ago or any year Optic probably wished they had a sub when any of the kind of conflicting personalities happened.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
that would have been way more helpful.
but I don't think it will come from Scumper Formal. At least I wouldn't hope so, since they've kind of gone through it once already of not agreeing with each other. And so I would
It's
hope
hard to
they
tell.
know how to deal with that now,
I
since
think
they've been through it once before. But you never know. And they do have Mbos as a substitute, but
he's not a
he's just a
substitute.
streamer. Let's
He's
be honest. He's gonna be. I would imagine Mbos is probably like the sub that will come with them to all the events. Uh, so
yeah,
that they
he's
can
gonna
let
film for
general
Hex.
play in the pay to play. I would imagine that would be how it works.
Maybe. That's
That would make most sense to me
true.
is to have Embos be the one sub that they have at the events with them, so that general can play in the pay to play unless they actually need general to play on the team.
I really
Uh,
do feel what happened with Imbos was Optic didn't want him, which they got rid of a lot of the content creators that were just kind of sitting idly. And Imbos went to Hex and was like, "Yo, dog, let me get on this COD team. I'll do whatever you guys need me to do." He knows the drill as far as like all the content and stuff goes, and that's fine. I'm never mad um about content because I think that really promotes the sport in as a whole. So I don't think Imbos is truly a sub on there. He's more of a, yeah, you're on the team just so we can kind of, convince the NRG to keep paying you, but you're not gonna play Call of Duty. If Imbos plays Call of Duty, I'll eat my words, but I don't see Imbos playing Call of Duty. But I would like to say that the hardest thing that I see this team running into is not necessarily chemistry, not necessarily team conflicts. I think they have a giant monkey on their back, which leads me to our next team, and that monkey on their back is Dallas Empire. Oh man,
Yeah, it's a pretty good roster, I'd
it's
say.
not bad, not bad.
It's a lot of I think there's like well not really unknowns, but you got two really young players again. Clayster taking two really young players. I mean, I would consider Beasley a young player that he brought on day one last year. Didn't do like wasn't on any significant orgs in World War II, but brought him on to E United and then brought Simp on later. And so this is kind of like a similar situation to that, except this time now he's got Crimsix and Hook with him instead of the
Hook,
twins.
hook. Oh man, this is definitely the bad guy of all the Call of Duty teams. They're trying to promote themselves like that. Clayster's always
I
been a
think one of them's trying to promote it. Clayster's just kind of he's not really promoting like the bad boy vibe. He's just promoting like, yeah, we're gonna win. We're good.
that's how Clayster's
I think
always
it's more
been.
so Crimsix that's kind of like, yeah, we're gonna crap on the Huntsman. We're gonna destroy everyone.
Yeah, you guys made a mistake. Never forgive, never forget. Like, come on, dude. Calm down. Calm yourself. That being said, the Huntsman, like Scump came out and said that the Huntsmen are having trouble with Empire. I'm sure that if the Huntsmen, who I have going really, really high, if they are having a hard time beating Empire right now, then probably everybody's having a hard time beating Empire right now. I would imagine that they're probably the best team coming into this season.
Yep.
Clayster and Crimsix brings such a work ethic. They practice like a professional sports team. Like if they were the NBA or the NFL, their work ethic would fit in perfectly because they work hard. They go to practice and they practice like it's serious, like they're playing champs. Um,
Yeah.
and I
And
think that's why they probably don't even have a coach, is because you have Clayster and Crimsix to just carry that coaching position.
yeah, there might be a coach that we don't know of hiding in the shadows. Uh, I don't know, like the Sith. I mean, they have Luke Skywalker, so maybe there's like some evil Sith going on in the background pulling the strings as a coach. But this roster, feels really well balanced to me. I don't know. I feel like looking at the three we've discussed or going to have discussed so far, like Atlanta, Dallas, and Chicago, Dallas feels like probably the most well balanced team out of them. You have veterans, you got young guys, and then you got Hook that's just going to do whatever the heck he needs to win.
Yeah,
And I think where I was worried with the Huntsmen and their S&D, I'm not worried with Dallas at all in that category.
their search and destroy game is unparalleled. Back before streaks got banned, which the Empire was the big reason why streaks got banned. Clayster was regularly dropping chopper gunners on pro teams in search and destroy. I don't understand how in the world he was doing that, but I mean he's obviously disgusting at it. Crim Six brings a lot to the table with search and destroy. He's I mean, there's plenty of videos out there. Just go look up any of the aces that Crim Six has had, or any of the 1v5s that Crim Six has been in, and the times that he's come out on top. Like he's one of the search and destroy gods in this game. Hook has always been the what do you need? I will do it. Last year he kind of fell off from his World War II game, but Hook in World War II was absurd.
I
Um,
mean, he was really good last year too. I mean, if you look through the pro league, he was ninth overall for KD and respawn. He was 11th overall in both damage per minute and score per minute. Score per minute not being as important in this one, obviously,
true.
since you don't have streaks. But the damage per minute, I think, on this team, it's actually for like the three players that you have, or I guess four if you're including Tommy, that you have pro league numbers for, they're the best in damage per minute. Like all their numbers are absolutely absurd.
Oh yeah,
You
they're
got
frying everybody right now.
You got Clayster at 31 for rank in damage per minute, but then you got Hook at 11, Crimsix at 6, and Tommy at 12.
Yeah,
So like even if
508
something
damage per
happens,
minute.
you still have Tommy as a sub, who's a really really good player to have as a sub.
Yeah,
And then you got Tish, who I don't know too much about, but I don't really have a lot of stats on him, but
I feel like he's just a player that
Dallas picked
you
him up, so
he's just a player that you're going
he's
to
probably
develop
good.
in your roster over time. You know, you're going to bring him in. You're going to work with him just like any other major sports team. You have guys that sit the bench. They're going to watch the veterans do the work, and when it comes their time, they're going to be a really really good player because guess what? They've been playing with Clayster and Crimsix and Hook. Turns out you get good by surrounding yourself by good players. So I'd imagine that Tish by the end of the season is going to be, you know, he's going to be able to fulfill any role that he needs to for this team. You know, God forbid anything happens to these guys. That being said, this team is you're not wrong. They're the complete package. At the very beginning of the season when roster mania was kind of hitting, I looked at Dallas Empire and I said, this team out of the gates is going to win a lot of games. Will they be the best team at the end of the season? It's hard to tell. But I knew
Yeah.
that Clayster and Crimsix were going to work these guys to the bone in the very beginning to get that edge over everybody. And I would not be surprised if Dallas Empire came into Minnesota and took it all.
Yeah, I wouldn't be too surprised at it either.
Uh,
And so I think that, unless you had something else you wanted to mention about
no,
the
I
Dallas
definitely want to get on to the Florida Mutineers.
Empire.
Um,
Yeah, so this roster is interesting because a lot of people would say that they're trash, but I don't think this roster is actually that bad. At least, like, if you look at them from last year, maybe this year they're not as good since this game's, I would say, pretty different from Black Ops 4. I know there's still kind of a lot of movement involved in it. So some of that stuff transitioned over. But I would say it's probably a little bit more similar to World War II, which we don't have a lot of info or stats from that we could get for this roster. But if you look at them from last year, I mean, you got Skies, Havoc, and Mox.
and
They
Caesar Skies,
destroyed.
Caesar
They
Skies,
destroyed a lot of last year.
Caesar Skies came in halfway through. They were just
Yes,
like,
guys.
this guy is just destroying people in the pro am. It's not even fair. So he
I
got
mean, he
picked
was
up.
destroying people on not main
Exactly.
stage,
He
but
went he went into
he was doing
CWL.
really good on Luminosity.
Oh man, he was yeah, unreal. Like Caesar Skies is definitely one of the best pickups of last year. And I'm really excited to see where he goes this year. Havoc is one of the best search and destroy players in Black Ops 4. I'm sure that he'll carry a lot of that same mentality going in. Pristini is the old guy on the team per se. You know, he's going to bring a lot of experience with him. And then we have Frosty and Mount. So that's those a couple interesting names. I think Mal brings
Mox.
or is it Mox?
It's Mox.
Oh, okay. Well, so Mox, my bad, Mox.
Mox was
Mox,
on Gen G last year.
yeah, Mox was like one of the only like had his head on his shoulders on Genji, and I'm not saying Genji was a bad team, but I think Mox was
They're
one
a
of those
really
that,
good team.
yeah, no, I wouldn't disagree with that either. I was really upset to see them not get a bid for CDL. Um, but what Mox brings to the table is he is pretty dominantly a good search and destroy player, but he's also just a decent slayer too. Like, you know, bringing in pretty high DPM and a decent size score per minute isn't necessarily a bad thing, but his kill death and search absolutely ridiculous. So I think Havoc and Mox are a match made in heaven for a search and destroy team. And in every Call of Duty, your search game has to be on point, and I don't think this game's an exception.
Yeah, I do hope that their search game is good with Havoc and Mox because I think every player on this team is pretty good at search and destroy, except for last year. Pristini was really, really bad at search and destroy. I want to direct your eyes over to the first blood, first death ratio of
Oh
Pristini
gosh,
at a 0.56.
that's got to be the worst, right?
That it is not the worst, surprisingly, but out of the pros that are still in the pro league, it is the second worst.
Jeez. Oh yeah, no, I see it now. We missed that
He has the
with old
second
Tish.
worst first blood, first death. And with this being slightly slower game maybe than Black Ops 4. I hear players saying that it's not actually that slow of a game. You can play it pretty fast with
Can
that double sprint. So he can get around the map really well, and Pristini's known as probably one of the most aggressive players in the game. but I do hope that they're able to kind of shore up that atrocious first blood to first death percentage, because if he's going in and only getting the first blood 1 out of 2 times, that's not really putting your team into a very good scenario, especially when you have AR players such as Sky and Mox, who I would say are probably on the slower side of kind of that AR class. You kind of have some subsets in the AR where you have ARs that are a lot slower, and then you have some ARs that are maybe are a lot more faster and aggressive in kind of how they like to play the map. I would say Skies and Mox are probably of the more passive in that role. The play style that they like to take, I would say, is a little more long distance.
Yeah,
So it should
I
be interesting to kind of see how those play styles match up.
I'm sure that what's happening right now is Skies and Mox are looking at Prestini and saying, "Hey, man, we really need to get you in this position. Like, you don't have Simp the Pimp running around staying cracked out of his mind anymore. Like, we got to bring it back down to a little more manageable level, and we're gonna need you to pull your weight." So, I think Prestini's probably gonna have a different mindset with it. Has the potential to be the star player on this squad, but I wouldn't count Florida Mutineers out. I think they're probably bottom middle of the pack, but I don't think that they're the worst team in CDL right now.
Yeah, I think the biggest kind of question mark on this team is Frosty. Frosty didn't have like a really stellar season last year, and I mean, you don't really know like how flexible he is in kind of his roles. You have Skies and Mox as the clear ARs. You have Havoc as an SMG. Prestine's probably running an SMG as well, I would imagine. So it's kind of like, are they going to run a third AR? Are they going to run Frosty as a sub or with an SMG?
Right
Kind of
now,
like where how they're fitting him into the mix on this roster.
right now that
And they don't really have anyone they can substitute. They have Maniac
he's
as their
he's
sub,
not a
who's
sub.
not going to play, or at
If
least I would hope.
Imbos or
And
Maniac play in the CDL, I will eat my words, but I really
yeah,
just don't see them playing. Like, he's great for content and everything, and I appreciate that a lot of these teams are looking for ex Optic Gaming players to kind of boost up their and ex FaZe players. I don't know if I said that. Um because we're going to get to a team here in a little bit that also has the same kind of thing lurking in their subs. You just need somebody to create content for you, somebody who can kind of do that as a full-time job, and they just want to be involved with the team and with the team's community. I think that happened quite a bit, and you'll notice that most of them are associated with Optic, FaZe, or 100 Thieves, and I think that's kind of interesting. But they really don't have any subs, so if Frosty just starts being bad, they're gonna have to start. They're gonna have to like look for somebody right away. I don't think Florida's gonna get there this year. I wouldn't say that they're out of the picture completely, and I could see them really making some adjustments and being better. But with the current roster, they are not one of the top teams. But I don't think they're one of the worst teams either. It will take adjustments for them to get there. If they stay with this roster, they probably will end up at the bottom of the barrel. I'd imagine that
yeah.
um, that they do have room for improvement, but they're not at the end of the line.
It feels like they're really good at some things, just not good enough to kind of break through to the top.
True.
But the next team we're going to talk about from across the pond is the London Royal Ravens,
Oh man, this team right
where we
here.
actually have a lot of people on the coaching staff. The most, well, not the most, but a lot compared to some of the other teams.
I
You
mean,
got Joe as the coach, uh, Dominate as the assistant coach, and Shane as the strategic coach.
I'm really curious
Uh,
to see how those guys work together because a lot of these guys have been like the big dogs on the teams that they've been coaching, and now they have to sort of work together. I'm not saying is set up for failure, but a lot of the coaching staff is like they will have to learn how to really communicate and effectively work as a team within the team if they're gonna make this roster realize its full potential. But the roster is stacked. Oh my gosh. Wuskin,
yeah,
Scraps, Dylan, Jerd, and Rated. Who who got this team? And then as your substitutes, you have Shawnee and Madcat. That's not a bad team at all. I mean,
It's not a bad team, and I mean, if you look at Red Reserve from World War II, Rated was on that roster. They did extremely well throughout points of that year, and I mean, even last year, Black Ops 4, yes, they got a lot, I would say, easier bracket, but they were able to get top six.
yeah, I'm pretty high on a lot of these players. They did, you know, individually they did phenomenal things, and I am excited to see how well they work with other teams moving forward. I will say that probably their weak point, and this is one of the complaints that I have about having a team over in Europe, but they're just going to be on a different time zone than everybody else, and that jet lag is going to be hard. Um, you know, it's going to be good for one or two tournaments. So I'm assuming every event is going to be at a different location.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure they've already said that.
are they practicing in Europe though, or are they in the U.S.?
I would imagine some of the players are. I know that I think Luskin and Scraps are both English. Um, I
Well, I mean, the whole roster is European.
is European, yes.
But
Um,
I think a lot of the, if not the whole team, is in the United States for like the duration of the season.
and they very well could be, and I think that's pretty smart considering that you have
I mean, yeah,
12
that's the
events
only
and 10 of
option.
them and 10 of them are in the United States. Two of them are in Europe with London and Paris.
Yeah, your only realistic scrim partner is going to be would be a bunch of AM teams, and
Exactly.
then Paris, which I think London's a lot better than Paris. So I don't
Yeah,
know
we'll
how
we'll
much that how
we'll get
helpful
to
that would be,
Paris
but
in
we'll get
a
to that.
little
Yeah,
bit. Yeah. Um,
but
I think the biggest takeaways from this team, Search and Destroy. I think they're going to do great in. Luskin and Scraps are a phenomenal team with it. I know Scraps is his stats don't really speak to it, but his communication is the big thing that brings him over the top, and his reads on the plays. He will be the one that will make the read on the play, and then he'll usually die, but he already made the read, and the rest of the team can kind of adjust, and he's got a really good read to him. I remember watching that a lot of times in Black Ops 4, and he was right a lot more times than he was wrong, and that was something that really helped phase out, be
yeah,
more dominant in the end.
I think as well. You got Rated and you got Joe. Those are two very S&D minded players. I think on this team. That I think will help them a lot in S&D, especially with Joe being a full-time coach. I think that will really help them in S&D. And then I mean, they're nothing to sneeze at in slaying. I mean, this is a slower game than Black Ops 4, which I think will really help rate it out. And then you got players that I'm not worried about at all, and Dylan Scraps and Wuskins, who are just all really good. I think the one player I'm probably most nervous about is Jared. He didn't have a crazy year last year, and I don't think the year before that was all too well either in World War II. So if he's doing well this year, this is going to be a really good team. I think. I don't know how much the subs will get to play. I think out of the two subs, the one that will probably get playtime the most would be Mad Cat. I think
Yeah.
he's a more flexible player than Shawnee, who I think is kind of more of a budget rated. They
Yeah.
play a very they play very similar. They kind of have similar roles on the teams that they've been on, and so I don't see them really needing to put Shawnee in unless they need to sub rate it out for some reason. I see Mad Cat probably getting put in a lot more likely, where he's probably thrown in maybe as like a flex player, and then they move Scraps or Wuskins around to the SMG role uh, with Dylan if they're going to sub Jerd out or maybe something else.
I do see
But
them potentially if Jerd is is not working out for them, they could very easily just take Jerd, put him in the sub, put Mad Cat in, and I could see them going from if Jerd doesn't play the way he plays, I could see them going from like a middle of the pack team to a top five team. This is still one of the best teams in COD, but based on roster alone on paper. And unfortunately, they haven't had a lot of time and they don't create a lot of content, so there's not a lot for us to see right now based on what they're doing in Modern Warfare. That being said, I wouldn't discount them at any given time. This is definitely not one of those teams that you're saying, "Oh, we get to play London, free win." That's not the case at all. A lot
yeah,
of these
and
players
I
know better.
imagine they'll probably get some content put out. I mean, they had Shane last year. I don't know if Shane was kind of the one formulating all the content that Reciprocity was doing, but doubt. I mean, you got people as funny as Scraps and Wuskins. I don't know how they couldn't be pushing stuff with
Right.
them.
I think you could have, almost like a little mini Monty Python in Call of Duty with Weskin and Scraps alone. There's some really funny dudes. Uh I I think all of these teams should be pushing content, but it's really hard to. I'm not gonna lie, it's a hard thing to push a lot of content, and that's why you have very few of those organizations really rise to the top. But if you recognize, how much success like Optic, for example, has had, and if you go to any event, I mean, I know you you go to plenty of events, but if you go to any event, you'll see half of the fans that are sitting in the stands are Optic fans. So it does bring a lot of returns to an organization, and I think that's something that every organization should focus on at least a little bit. So,
Yeah.
I
I mean, I honestly don't think it's too difficult. I mean, they're scrimming around 6 hours a day. Maybe some of them are scrimming 9 if they're doing 3 sets of scrims. But I feel like you can manage your schedule in a way where it's like, okay, this is my full time job. I mean, because if you're making content, not only are you're raising your stock as a player. I mean, and that's one thing I feel like a lot of the League of Legends players, we keep on seeing them bringing over a bunch of imports instead of fostering NA talent. If you're like an NA player and you want to try and get on a roster, it can only help you to create content and raise your stock and your following.
Yeah, look at Scum. Oh my God, guy makes bank, absurd amounts of money streaming. Same with Formal. Censor. Censor is the one guy who I'm like, why? He's not good. Why are you still making content? But man, people eat it up. So you don't even have to really be that good of a player. You just have to, have a good personality. And I think that London should be creating content. I'm just kind of
Yeah.
curious why they're a little behind on it.
It doesn't even need to be anything crazy. I mean, all right,
No,
let's
it
say,
doesn't need
all
to
right,
be the
let's say,
campaign.
yeah, let's say this is your schedule. All right, let's just say this is your schedule. Get up at 10 a.m. Teams are scrimming around like noon now, if
Yep.
I'm correct. Get up around, all right, we'll say get up around 9. Get up around 9, get breakfast, start a stream from 10 to 12 or whatever. 2 hours of streaming. You got your scrims. Scrims are done. It's like 6 o'clock. Get some dinner, start up your stream again, or record content with the team or whatever. Like you have people with your team that can help you create content. Like it shouldn't be like this thing where I'm not good enough to do it, or
You could just
you shouldn't.
you could stream your scrims.
You could stream your
Fancy.
scrims. I know a lot of the teams don't want to do that,
Right, and I
but
understand that that's part of it, but you
I
got to think like if
yeah
you put just a little bit of your content out, like look at Huntsman, look at Dallas Empire, look at FaZe, look at who else is putting out ridiculous content right now? Optics not they've kind of fallen off in content, but a lot of these guys are already putting out content, and I don't think it's really going to affect their performance per se. It's just something that, get some free money for practicing, and it's two birds, one stone. I wouldn't be mad about it.
yeah.
Um,
It's not like they're scrimming S&D, so they're not losing too much.
well,
So
speaking of, streaming and filmmaking and Hollywood, let's go to the first Hollywood team with the
moving on
LA
to the LA
LA
Gorillas,
Gorillas.
who by far have the worst logo I have ever seen.
Yeah, what the
It's
hell is this? This is like
If Shawnee is a budget rated, the Gorillas logo is a low budget Spider-Man.
this is exactly what this is. This is like the fifth grader that wanted to draw Gwen Stacy from Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse. That's what this logo is.
And
Um,
speaking of low budget, this roster seems very low budget.
Oh man, when
If the
Aches is your player, like the
but
guy who's supposed to be running this all. Oh,
Aches isn't even the guy. All right. We'll go through the players. We'll go through the coaches first because this team has two coaches from last that were coaches last year. You got Bevels and you got Ricky. I trust Bevels.
I
Don't
def
trust
I
Ricky too
definitely
much.
don't trust Ricky.
And then you got Doug as analyst. Doug, I believe, is someone from COD Stats. I'm not 100% sure. I could be wrong with that. But I believe he was
I
COD
think you're right. I think
Stats.
he was a COD stats guy.
So their stats are going to be amazing. But Bevels had a really good coaching season in World War II. really, really bad one in Black Ops 4. And
Yes.
then Ricky, well, all right, before we even like kind of talk, we got to go through the players too. But like
Yeah.
these coaches, I don't feel are going to have any impact on these players, especially Ricky. Ricky couldn't coach Luminosity, who is by far the Luminosity roster of last year, who was by far easier to coach than this team.
They were way better too.
They were
You have
better too, but like
you
no
have like
one's gonna listen to Ricky on this roster. Who's gonna listen to him? Aches?
especially Eggs. Eggs is
Aches not gonna listen to him.
Eggs is not going
Saints
to
isn't
listen
gonna
to
listen to him.
anybody. I couldn't name a
Aqua's not. Lacefield's
single.
not. Who's gonna listen to Ricky on this roster? No one's gonna listen to Ricky on this roster.
I couldn't.
The only person that Aches kind of respects is Bevels, I feel. But even then, I don't feel
No.
like any of the other players are gonna listen to Bevels on this roster.
Eggs is
And the
old,
best
man.
player on this roster is Aqua. And if your best player on this roster is Aqua, who hasn't been stellar for the past like year, you're in trouble.
Yeah, this is definitely setting
This
up to
team's
be.
average KD from last year was below a 1.
Yeah,
Their
point nine
average
six
KD was a 0.96 from last year. That is the lowest out of any team that is currently
in
here.
the CDL.
Ace had a terrible season last season. I mean, I think Ace will be a lot better this season since it's a bit more World War II esque. But with how much he's been complaining on Twitter with the movement, I'm still a little bit skeptical if he's actually going to be able to do anything.
Aches is gonna complain. I think the big thing for Aches is Aches has this thing where if you ever wore an optic jersey, he is automatically 3 times better against you. So the fact that the optic crew kind of fell apart means that he'll probably try a lot harder against the Huntsman, Empire, and then of course Optic Gaming LA. So that's one positive thing about Aches. But he's just getting old, man. He's getting old, and it's pretty telling.
I mean, he's still
His
younger than Clayster.
Clayster is an anomaly. Formal's an anomaly. Aches
I
is
wouldn't say an anomaly. I mean, you got CS:GO pros that are like 30 years old.
also totally different game. I feel like Counter Strike's a lot different of a game than Call of Duty. It requires way way way
I'm
way
just
way
saying
more
it's
gun
been
skill.
done before. We won't go into like trying to compare the two since they're not really too comparable.
No, no. I think that Aches is just gonna be like your average Call of Duty player. He's nearing his retirement age, and I'm I would imagine that what happened was the Gorillas, they spent most of their money trying to get the team off the ground. Somebody in LA was like, you know what? I like Call of Duty. Let me go ahead and buy one of these teams real quick. And then they were like, "Oh man, that was a lot of money. Well, I don't have as much money now to get a team." So they probably picked up Aches and maybe Saints first. And then they were like, "All right, well that's a lot more of my money now."
And they probably got Ace and Bevels, and then
Oh
Ace and
yeah,
Bevels put together the team
team.
from the leftover scraps.
Yeah, exactly. I think they were just behind on everything. A lot of the teams.
That's on like this team is literally what EG was last year.
Yeah, it really is what was left. And EG did not have a phenomenal year last year. Blast as a substitute is exciting, but um, I still don't see that this team. This is probably the worst team in CDL right now, and I think it would take.
Honestly, do you think it would be better if you no, I don't know if it'd be better. If you took out eggs for blast?
I
Because
think
then you got a bunch of
you got a bunch
maybe
of younger
like
guys
younger people that would I like try and pull an Atlanta, but I don't feel like they have the coaching staff to do what Atlanta is, and I feel like probably not all the players are of the same mindset. I feel you got a lot of conflicting personalities on this team or egos.
without moving anybody off like into the team or anything, keeping the same people just moving around their roles. I would fire Ricky because I just think that you're spending a lot of money for somebody who just hasn't been performing. I would move Aches to Ricky's spot, and I would make him the assistant coach with Bevels, and I would move Blast into the official roster, and I think you would have a better chance. but I still see them as like a bottom three team at that point.
Yeah, but I
Unless
think the issue with that is like, what are the roles? Because you got Lacefield, Saints, and Decimate that are most likely SMGs, and then you have Aqua and Blast. I think is
well,
traditionally an
he's
SMG player as
traditionally an
well.
SMG player, which means that on one out of the many maps that are gonna have a decent time, and that's Hackney. But I mean, you're every other map you need two ARs. You need two
Yeah,
ARs. You need
you'd
two
probably
subs.
move Lacefield up to the AR role if you were to do that. I would imagine.
I could see Lacefield being the first person you would move to the AR role, but everybody at this point, um, everybody except one player needs to be sort of flex like. I think that's the
Yeah.
true key to success is being able to master both the MP5 and the M4 and really do well with it. And there's some snipers out there that'll definitely change the tide of the game, but you you really only want like one dedicated sub guy, and I think that's another huge pitfall of this team. LA is setting themselves up for failure right now, and they're probably gonna end up at the bottom of at least um my CDL ranking. I would imagine that they're not gonna be very good. That's about all I have for LA Gorillas, so I'm ready to move on to Roker.
Yep. Let's stop being so depressing and let's move on to the Minnesota
Exactly.
Rockar. I don't know really how to pronounce that, but I imagine that's how it goes.
Probably. It's a
And so,
disgusting logo. Like the colors are great. The team looks pretty good. I'm pretty
yeah,
excited
it's
for
not bad.
Minnesota. It's
You
not
got
bad.
Assault, got our X, Silly, Alex, Asim, and then their two subs are Exceed and Tiny.
And definitely don't
Uh,
forget the coaching staff, Saint and Reppin. Like I really feel like if this team starts clicking, they could be a top five team. Um,
yeah, I mean Saints didn't have too well of a year coaching last year. He was coaching United, then got replaced by Facento, who obviously did a stellar job. And then Saints went on to coach the Midnight team, which didn't do too well.
yeah, Midnight and E United definitely did a 180 midway through the Black Ops 4 season,
Yeah.
and
Obviously, a lot of the Midnight players got subbed out, and United brought in Simp. But I think some of that you definitely can probably contribute to coach. So it should be interesting. This is probably going to be if the Minnesota Rock can do well. It will be a bit of like a redemption story, I'd say, for Saints. But he's definitely got an interesting roster and I would say a pretty decent roster going into the CDL season.
I would definitely say more than decent. Assault, Gardex, and Silly are all insanely good players, and they alone could carry a team.
Salt didn't
Stats,
do too well last year, but he was very good in World War
he was
II. I will
great in
admit.
World War II. And even like Alex and the team, like they aren't bad players. I
No,
really
I
do.
think Asim's great. Asim on this roster is definitely going to be the player that he's kind of your Hook, I would say.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, I could say that.
Not as good as Hook, but he's kind of that player that's like, all right, give me the role, I'll get it done, I'll do whatever we need to do to win. He's kind of that player, and a lot of the pros have kind of said that they love playing with him because of that. So I feel like he'll be a very good fit on this roster where you have a very slow assault rifle in assault, and then got some of the other players.
I think Assault is definitely gonna shine here in Modern Warfare. I think that having a slower AR is very beneficial whenever you can hit shots like that. Formal has already shown that you can really do whatever you want in this map if you know where the spots are. And I mean, every time Formal finds a spot, everybody else is pretty quick to follow. So I think Assault is gonna do well in this. I don't think he's going to be one of the best ARs, but I think he's going to be a very solid AR. GodRX and Silly are both phenomenal. Only
Yep,
part,
I've
only
been waiting for GodRX. I've been waiting. Sorry to cut you off, but I've been
no, no,
waiting for GodRX to get on a pro team. Every team I've seen him on, he's been doing fantastic.
no.
So
I think GodRX is probably the star of this team moving forward. Him or Silly. But you can't discount Alex. I think Alex is really if they have a hope in Search and Destroy, it's an Alex. God X is definitely another really, really good player in Search and Destroy. Both of them hosted some impressive KDs, top 20 in CWL last year. I think the big thing moving forward with his team is getting on that Search and Destroy grind, finding your lanes that you can play that Assault will kind of click with, and then everything else should kind of just fall into place. The hard point isn't going to be the most spectacular thing. Like it's not going to be pretty anytime, and I guarantee you they won't 100 point club anybody. But they have a team at least. I think Minnesota could be one of the top 5 teams going into this season. We'll
Yeah,
see.
no, it should be interesting. They kind of have the pieces. I think a lot of it will come down to teamwork, how well they're able to play together and kind of win.
Yeah, and I think Saint and Reppin can hopefully bring it that way. Um, I think next is the team that I'm actually really, really excited to talk about. Probably one of my underrated teams in the New York Subliners. Funny as it is to say, but I really do think that the Subliners haven't been getting anywhere near the amount of attention that they deserve. This roster is blew the doors off. Coach Revin and JP Krez. JP Krez is the analyst. Coach Revin is going to be he's going to be decent, but the players Zuma, temp, accuracy, zero, and attach with not necessarily the best substitutes, but they won't need to sub anybody. This roster is disgusting.
Yeah, I think the roster is really good. Looking at kind of like all the players, at least like looking at their names. Their stats last year weren't all that crazy. Zero, especially kind of low overall stats, but I think a lot of that, since it was from the Pro League, was when he was running a sub. Once he made the switch to the AR, performed a lot better. And so I think you have Zero with accuracy. Accuracy a bit more kind of the slower AR player. Zero a little maybe a little more aggressive than kind of accuracy. I think those two will work really well off of each other. And then you have Attach and Zuma, who of course I think work extremely well together with their
Yeah,
play
yeah.
styles. And then you have Temp, who I honestly think is a really, really good player. I mean, everyone will say he's probably really, really good, but I think he's also, I would consider him a very selfless player. I mean, last year he switched his role around to make other players on the team more comfortable, which I think a lot of players aren't willing to do, but he was. And I think he did that so that the team could have their best chance in winning. So I give a lot of stock to Temp for doing that and kind of what he's able to bring, obviously, in his stats. I mean, last year, number one overall for damage per minute. Uh,
551. That's absurd. That blows the doors off everybody else. And his score per minute was nothing to shake your head about either. And with a 118 KD and hardpoint, it's pretty obvious that this team is going to have a very strong foot um, forward with hardpoint at least. And their search and destroy game is nothing to shake your head at either because Attach is one of the best search and destroy players in the game. Pulled a 1.2 in search and destroy last year, which is the eighth overall. And then uh, like with our first blood, first death, both accuracy and attach had insane numbers, a 141 and a 131. They have what it takes to be a premier search and destroy team, and I think with Temp leading the way, they have a really good chance of being one of the premier hardpoint teams. I don't think out the gates they're going to be one of the best hardpoint teams, but all the film that I've watched on them so far, they've been giving everybody a run for their money.
yeah,
They
I think it will probably take Zuma. I think Zuma is probably the key player on this team, at least for the respawn game modes. Once he can kind of figure out how he wants to play the game, I think this team will see a big increase in kind of their win percentage.
I would imagine they leave Minnesota as a top 5 team. So I would put them also in a top 5 team. They're definitely top half. I like I said, they're very underrated. Not a lot of people are talking about New York right now, and I think that's a shame because this team has what it takes to be one of the top teams in the CDL.
Yep. And I really like the coaching staff that they brought into. Yeah, JP Krez, who's obviously one of the head guys for COD Stats. And then you got Revin, who I honestly really liked as a coach last year, even though the teams that you saw weren't performing super well. But
I I,
I
I
think
just think that
a lot of that was on the players and not as so much on the coach.
you can only do so much as a coach to, get your players to realize their full potential. Whenever you're given rosters like that, it's really, really hard to do anything as a coach. Um, Now you give Revan five of the biggest names in Call of Duty. I think he'll be able to work with that.
Yep.
Speaking of five of the biggest names in Call of Duty, I think we finally get around pleasing most of the people that are going to watch this video or listen to this podcast with Optic Gaming LA.
Yep.
Oh man,
The
all the
second LA team, but they got to put their name before the city. The only team that got to put their name before the city.
that really just shows you how big of an outreach Optic has, and they weren't gonna give up the Optic brand or anything, regardless of all of the drama. And there was an absurd amount of drama with all the drama that went around with Optic last year. It's kind of surreal to see an Optic team and not see Scump's name there. Same with, Karma, Crim6, Formal. You have all these like great players, but I really do think that this is the next big team. I really do.
Really?
So
Okay. Well, I'm interested in hearing this. So first, we'll just say the roster. They have Pac-Man as a coach. Just got him. Their starting lineup is TJ Halley, Dashy, Kenny, Slasher, and JCap, with substitutes Chino and Gunjar.
honestly, I think all of these players are some of the best to ever really play this game. Some of them are very young, but I mean, you have a lot of talent on this roster. But I'll start with Pac-Man first. So if you've never ever watched Call of Duty, or if you very rarely watched Call of Duty, you know who Pac-Man is. Pac-Man is he's been one of the commentators for a long time. He did a lot of commentating for CWL last year, and for him to become a coach, stellar decision. I think that he has his head on his shoulders pretty well for what he's trying to say. He's very charismatic and he is a natural leader. Every time he's in the booth, he's the one hosting. People pay attention to Pac-Man more than they pay attention to anybody else. Pac-Man's mouth opens, everybody quiets down and listens. Pac-Man is the guy that, while he doesn't have as much coaching experience as some of these other guys, he's gonna come in here and he's gonna get to work. And I think that's really important for an Optic team that lacked a lot of discipline last year. Speaking of, two players that returned to Optic, TJ Haley and Dashy, both had stellar stats as far as your um, your overalls go. Dashy is one of the best players in the entire world, if not the best player in the entire world. I mean, he's right up there with Simp, number 2 overall in hardpoint, and then he pulled
In
a
every stat category last year.
every stat
Well, at least
category.
every stat quarter category that I
Well,
thought mattered, which
my
was KD, score per minute, damage per
damage
minute.
per
Not
minute.
not he didn't do too well in hill time, but that's
Well,
beside the point.
Optic didn't do very well in Hill Time last year, if we're gonna be
Yeah,
honest.
that is true.
Like, I don't know if you were watching Champs on Sunday, but nobody wanted to get on that thing. Um, so I think TJ Haley and Dashy work really well together. I think they're gonna bring a lot to this team. They're very young. Same with Kenny. Kenny was the World War II Player of the Year, and he played out of his mind during World War II. He did great for 100 Thieves last year. He was just not as good as what he was in World War II.
He did
I
great once he made the transition to a Maddox.
Yeah, I think that was part of it, and I think the other part was, really sitting down and really putting his nose to the grindstone. I think he let off the gas for a little bit, was like, I'm the best player in the world, who's gonna stop me? And then, there was a lot of people that stood up and said, Nah, Kenny, you ain't that great. I think a little wake up call helped him out a lot. And the other player that I would like to give credit to Kenny's redemption is Slasher, who's also made it on this roster. And Slasher brings a lot of discipline. He's very similar to Clayster and Crim6. He wants to practice. He wants to treat this as a professional organization. He wants to treat this like a job and work, and you need to work at this and you need to practice. I think that's something that TJ Haley and Dashy are probably going to see for the first time in their, very young careers. Kenny knows the drill, and he'll be able to help Slasher with that. And I would honestly say that JCap, while he's nothing special, he played terribly last year. Uh,
He I got so finish your
Yeah,
finish.
sorry. So, while he did play terribly last year, and a lot of people questioned the decision for Optic to pick up JCap, he could be developed again to being one of the premier players in Call of Duty. And if he doesn't, you still have Chino and Gunjar to pick that up, and they're both phenomenal players as well, especially Chino. Chino is a 110 in Search last year. Like, that's unreal. 24th overall ranking. Like, oh my gosh. I'm pretty high on this roster, but I would like to hear what you have to say, Nick.
J Cap last year, I'm not even putting him as the fifth man. He could be a sub. Give me Gunjar. Like what? Why is he on the starting lineup? He was the worst player last year statistically that is still on a team. He was actually the worst in score per minute at rank 101 out of I think 101. I think there might have been 103 players that played in the pro league, and the only two worse than him were Fastballa and Ricky.
I I genuinely don't know how you get less than 300 score in hardpoint.
He
And
not only that, his KD was a 0.87 on average.
ah, jeez.
He is 93rd in KD.
And with less than a
Damage
minute
per minute,
of kill
damage per
time.
minute, damage per minute. He was at a flat 496 overall out of like 101 or 103, whichever it is.
Oh man.
Abysmal. Absolutely abysmal last year. This guy was.
You don't have to
And
tell me
he's
about
on
his search stats
Optic,
either.
his search stats were just as bad in
Yeah.
comparison. He had the exact same search KD as hardpoint KD at a 0.87, and his first blood to first death percentage was a zero point 0.7.
Yeah. JCap is he's got a lot of work to do. However,
He's got a lot of work to do.
I think you're
He's got a
surrounding
lot of
him
work to do.
with four of the premier players in Call of Duty, and then you also have two subs that are definitely hungry to not be subs. So I can
Yes,
see
but
JCap.
this is a 5-man game, not a 4-man game. This is a 5-man game. You
I,
need 5 players that can carry their weight. And I need to see some big changes from last year from JCap if I'm going to put Optic anywhere on this power rankings leaderboard that we'll eventually get to,
yeah,
because a 0.87 on average
oh terrible.
with the worst score per minute out of any pro is just not going to cut.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that they could have put Sensor in there, and he probably would have done better than JCap on paper at least. But like I said, I think it's gonna be make or break for JCap. He's either gonna he's gonna find his footing. He's gonna get back into sort of the old J Cap that we remember, and he'll get there, or he'll be like Aches, and it's just about time for him to hang it up. And Chino or Gunjar would both be very suitable replacements for J Cap. So I like I said,
I mean, 3 years ago, he was in the grand finals at COD Champs. And now was statistically the worst player in the pro league last year. Additionally, like you say, TJ and Dashy, they're going to see, it's going to be the first time they've seen kind of the work ethic of a pro with Slasher. They had that last year with Crim. They just blew him off, though. They didn't
yeah.
care.
Well, that's because
They're like,
Scump
oh,
allowed
get
them
this
to.
old fart out of here. We don't need him. I
And
mean, I think some of the issue, yeah, was probably that Seth would side with them, that Scumpy would side with them in that. But I
I,
I feel like you have Slasher and Kenny who are and J Cap's probably in the same mindset, I would hope, as Slasher, seeing as how he's been around for a while, of like what your worth ethic needs to be like. And it's gonna be extremely interesting to see if Dashy and TJ will buckle down and go with that.
I think we've already started to see this Optic team buckle down after that infamously horrible performance in hardpoint scrims against Empire, where they lost 250 to what was it 26. Slasher told Kenny to turn the stream off. Basically, as soon as they were done, there was no communication at all. Like nobody said a word in the last 30 seconds of the game. If you're kind of new to COD competitive, that's not supposed to happen. Like usually,
I mean, yeah, I'd be pissed.
yeah, I think they got a really rude awakening at that point, and I think that since then their work ethic has improved greatly. I think that you can watch an optic scrim right now, and you'll see a different optic team than in the very beginning, whenever they were scrimming, Empire and the Huntsman. I genuinely think that this optic team is gonna realize the full potential of TJ Haley. I still think that Dashy's one of the best players in Call of Duty. You know how I said Simp was the guy that everybody's calling out where he is? Same thing with Dashy. You also have Kenny, who they did that all last year with, and
I
I'm
think there's a bit of a difference though. Sim can force himself to play a game that he hates, whereas Dashy, I don't think can.
true, and I think that goes into it. I think there's a lot of psychology that goes into it, and I think that's really what we have to try and figure out right now is who these players are going to be throughout the season. I wouldn't completely discount um I wouldn't completely discount Dashy though. I genuinely think he's as good of a player this season.
I think he's really good. I think he's just been coddled his entire career.
That's
And
true.
I hope that his stay on this Optic LA roster will be a huge wake up call to him. I honestly do. I mean, his first year in the Pro League was with complexity with Sensor. Sensor's not going to be the guy that's like, oh, Dashy, you're putting up a 2.0 KD. I'm putting up a 1.7. But you need to come to practice more. You need to try harder. Like
Yeah.
Sensor's not going to be that guy. And then last year, like I was hoping last year, like it would be with that Optic roster, but they won Vegas. And then
They
Crim's
fell
still
off.
like, all right, guys, let's take this serious. Let's do this stuff. And Dashy and TJ are like, nah, we're good. We'll
No,
go do this, do
we're
whatever.
19-year-old kids. We don't know any better. No, I get it.
And I mean, so it'll be interesting to see. And I mean, they have the talent to be a good roster. I mean, maybe minus JCap, unless JCap shows up and does better than obviously he did last year. I mean, he wasn't bad in World War II, so we'll see. But I mean, they have disgusting players on their team, so we'll just have to see if it can come together and when it comes together, if it does. But I don't think it will come together, at least not at this first event.
I think that I do respect your opinion, but I'm feeling pretty good about this optic team. So
Okay.
I think we could definitely see them come out of the gates kind of strong again, and we'll see. We'll see. We'll definitely see.
Okay.
Speaking of teams that we'll
Well,
see, hopefully,
yes.
Harris Legion, who I don't even remember the date that they announced their roster, but it was so late. This, gosh, you can start with this one because I don't even know
Yeah.
where to start
So
with
they
Harris.
got Josh OP2, who was apparently the coach of Lightning Pandas last year, before they went from getting top six at Vegas. Well, he was the coach when they got top six at Vegas, and then when they didn't qualify for the Pro League, like 2 weeks later. Josh, I think, is that like Josh the COD Pro? I imagine, maybe.
Yeah,
I'm not
back in
sure.
the day, I'm pretty sure that's the same Josh, but two
And
H's.
then Novus Vita, who I have no clue who that is, but
Yeah,
he's a strategic coach, so I don't know how much that really means. Marky B is a strategic coach. I don't think Marky B really coaches too much. He's kind of more of like
he probably builds these
gets the
little.
players in the mindset, kind of builds chemistry, and is there to help them at events. I love Marky B because he has this. We'll get to Marky B, but he has this amazing suitcase of literally anything a COD Pro would need during the event. It's got hand warmers, energy bars, fruit snacks, controllers, like anything they would ever need.
That's
He's
great.
got extra jerseys. It's awesome. But yeah, and then their roster is actually the only roster that they haven't announced the starting five. The roster they have is Luca, Shocks, Dens, Kidmit, Phantoms, Zed, and Breezy. So this
Yeah.
is a pretty interesting one.
So
Uh,
I think the first guys that come to mind. I mean, everybody remembers kind of Dens and Kismet, and Brezzy. Brezzy definitely brought in a lot of talent last year, but for the most part, like these guys are Paris. Like when we said that when LA Gorillas got a late start to the roster lock, Harris got a super late start. There was I don't even know if the organization was even going to turn in a team, and then this is what they came up with at the end.
yeah,
Um, Phew.
two players that didn't play a single match in the Pro League that aren't new players to the Pro League. In Luca and Shocks, who spent the entirety of last year in the amateur circuit. Then you have Dens, Kismet, Zed, Phantoms, and Breezy. Breezy, surprisingly, he didn't play. I don't think he played the entire Pro League.
No, he got picked
But
up around the same time. I think he was the first roster mania.
he has. He was on the French roster at the start of it.
Yes.
But yeah, he actually has the best overall KD out of all of these players, and I'm not even certain if he'll be on the starting lineup. Honestly, I'd probably put him on the starting lineup, but I don't know who I'd sub him out for. He's also an AR player, at least that's what it says on the Gamepedia website. And then you got Phantoms as an AR player as well, but I don't think I would really want to sub out Phantoms.
I I genuinely think that you're probably gonna see Shox and Luca not play in the first few events because if you take a year off of professional COD, that is
It wasn't really, they didn't take a year off. I mean, they were still playing
they weren't
in the,
playing
they were playing, they were at
CWL.
all the events and they got first place, I think, at a couple in the amateur, like at like the main events. I think they lost to Face Cam Black, I know, which was like Simp Celium and a bunch of other young guns. I think like their biggest fall was when they didn't qualify for champs, even though like they had gotten first place at the open event prior. Honestly, I would probably start them over one of the other players simply because you got Dens. Dens has played with Shocks for most of his career up until like last year, probably. Well, I guess before World War II, but uh, he's played with Shocks for a good amount of time. Luke has played with Shocks for a good amount of time, so that's two players that already have some built-in chemistry. Zed has never played with any of these players outside of Dens, so probably keep him, and then probably pick between Kismet, Phantoms, and Breezy because those guys have never played with any of these guys, to my knowledge.
Yeah.
So you got to pick one of those guys.
I
Um,
think as far as what this team needs more than anything, I think that their hard point is going to be shoddy at best.
I think their
Um,
hard point's probably better than their search.
I think if they start breezy, their search is going to be pretty decent. I think the stats don't lie here. This team is kind of bad.
Yeah,
So I'm not high at all on Paris Legion. Like I said, this team feels like Paris didn't really know what in the world they were doing. They didn't know that they needed to get a team going right out the gate. I mean, some of these big teams were working on players right after champs. Like Scump's Scump lost and then immediately called formal and was like, "Look, I'm tired of these bums. Let's go get a team together." So it's pretty obvious that they didn't really start working on this until probably early December, late
yeah.
November.
It's not like the players are bad. I mean, Zed, Kismet, and Dens. None of them were bad players last year. They
Nothing
were
to
like
shake a stick at.
they were average players, I would say. I mean, Kismet was probably one of the better players on the E6 rosters, but I feel like he was very, very hit or miss throughout the season. It's
I
like
agree.
either he had a good game or he didn't have a good game at all. Dens probably is going to be and I feel like that's the same thing with Zed, where he either had a good game or he had a really bad game. And so this roster, I feel, is like probably going to be plagued with a decent amount of inconsistency, and their probably most consistent players that they want to focus around is probably Zed or not Zed Dens, who is very consistent throughout all of last year. He wasn't a stellar standout player by any means, but you knew what you were going to get from him, and it was going to be good the vast majority of the time. And so it should be quite interesting to see. So I imagine if it was me, I would probably build this around Dens, which they might have built this roster around Dens by like looking at the players that they picked up. But honestly, I would probably not start Phantoms simply because I'm looking at like all the stats and Hardpoint and Dom or whatever the respawn KDs are all pretty average. And then the S&D KDs and everything are all pretty average. But then I look over at the damage efficiency, which is that DEF stat that I have,
Yeah.
and Phantoms was the worst out of every other pro player in
Huh.
this stat. And so damage efficiency pretty much means how often the damage you put into a player equals a kill. And if he's the lowest at that, that doesn't really
So like
bode too well.
56% of the time. So he was basically just shooting at everybody. That's kind of sloppy in search. I mean, don't get me wrong, if you're holding the lane and if you can get a couple hits on somebody and you call out where they're going, that's effective, but I mean, if
Yeah.
you aren't able to get kills,
Well, is it effective? Because it's damage. All right. Well, I guess it's effective. Uh, it slows down pushes and everything, but with the way this game's playing, maybe those will turn into kills. I don't know. It's a lot. It's
honestly,
less health, so maybe they will.
yeah,
That should be pretty interesting. That's just one thing that I noticed where it seemed like he was significantly worse than everyone else on the team in search and destroy. And if you got a player like Breezy who was actually like statistically the best player out of the ones on this roster last year, I might start him over Phantoms. They're both an AR, so that would be an easy substitution if they were already only planning on having one of them on the starting lineup to make that swap.
yeah, I could definitely see that. I could also see them like them both playing. I think this is a more AR heavy game. Um, but at the end of the day, even with a perfect roster, even with all guys firing on all cylinders and playing their best Call of Duty, they're still not gonna do anything. I mean,
Yeah,
this is just not a well put together team, and it's pretty obvious that they started late, and I feel bad for the European fans of Call of Duty because it was pretty clear that Paris didn't put a lot of effort into.
I feel bad for the Paris Legion.
Yeah, I don't necessarily feel too bad for like their organization, their front office, or anything like that
No,
because
I'm saying like it was a play on words. It was a bad joke, but like the
oh
Legion of
okay,
Fans, the Paris
gotcha,
Legion.
yeah,
Yeah,
oh
okay. I'll
okay,
just
well
stop. I'll
we'll
just stop and we'll move on to Seattle.
yeah I was about to say we'll cut
Who
out
I
that bit.
love this roster, but I don't think it's going to do too well, sadly. And I'll get into that as to why. But their
Seattle I
coach
feel like
is,
is gonna be kind of like the subliners where they've got a lot of big names. Let's see how they all turn out. I do think
yeah,
that
I
subliners are
think
gonna
it's
be
a little
better,
bit
but
different. I think it's a little bit different than the subliners. But for the coach, they have Nubsy, who is the coach of Genji last year. A lot of respect for him. Did a
yep,
fantastic job.
Nubsy's
You have
great.
assistant coach Teddy Rex, who's known for S&D, so should be some good S&D strats coming out of him. For the starting lineup, you got Karma, Enable, Octane, Slacked, Apathy, with substitutes Pander and Proto. Pander and Proto, I both really liked their performances last year. I thought they were both very good players throughout the Pro League and Champs. Pander only really made it two Champs to play, and he did a phenomenal job there, I think, in most of the categories. But the starting lineup, Karma, Naval, Octane, Slacked, and Apathy, is very interesting. And the reason why I feel is because you have a lot of players that I feel are very selfless and will do what it takes to win for the team. And so I don't know if that will cause a lot of confusion. These are kind of like the players that you put into a roster to make it a complete roster that works well. But when you
Yeah,
take four players that are that type of player, will they work well as a roster? I honestly don't know.
there's
And
no
the only
stars on
like
this team.
the only like solid consistent player on this team is Octane.
Octane
Uh,
also did absurdly well in Black Ops 4 last year. In World War
yes.
II, whenever he was with Optic, that he couldn't seem to get anything going. It Octane really found his stride last year in Black Ops 4, and I'm not sure how well he'll be able to replicate it. So far in all the streams that I've seen, Octane seems to be pretty good. He likes the M4 a lot, and he's frying people with it. That being said, Karma is starting to get up there in age. You know, last year he really costed it for Optic on more than one occasion. And don't get me wrong, I mean his accolades will forever live in the Call of Duty Hall of Fame. Um,
I think he was a really good player last year, at least during the pro league. On at champs, definitely not. He definitely did not perform up to what you should be expecting out of him. But I think that can go for a couple of the optic players.
well, I think
Um,
Enable played awfully last year, and he was on a great team. So we'll see. I think Enable and Octane will have some sort of chemistry they'll bring from 100 Thieves over here. Apathy, I don't really understand how to really phrase what Apathy's gonna do in this. His damage efficiency in search is pretty impressive. 80% of the time he was gonna kill somebody he put bullets into, and that's gonna be really important for for Modern Warfare. But you're not wrong. These guys are all filler players that try to get the job done. You don't have any stars on this team. That could lead to, less drama and maybe you can develop some chemistry over time. But a lot of these guys,
yeah,
I feel like they're gonna be here to play and they're gonna get their check and they just I don't see like a guy here that just wants to win. They just want that win. Um, I think I think Karma a lot of the times, we say, he's like the GOAT, 3 rings, all of that stuff. He also was on teams that had that kind of player, with Aches back in the day or Crimsix or Scump or whoever. They had players that just wanted to win more than everybody else at the event. And um and I'm not saying he was, piggybacked. I think Karma can carry his own in a lot of ways, and I do think he's a phenomenal player. I am not confident in his ability to play Call of Duty this season. Um, Seattle, like I said, a lot of big names, but these are guys that are big names because they were on teams with superstars. So I would see Seattle playing below average. They're probably average below average going into the season, and I don't really see them doing anything this year.
I think one of the things with Seattle is a lot of the players they have right now are players that struggle at the start of a new game. You look at Enable, you look at Apathy, and you look at Slacked. None of those players are ever good at the start of a new title.
True.
It's not until pretty much the final quarter of the season that they're able. Well, Slacked last year brought it on about a lot earlier into the game, but at least Enable and Apathy don't really figure out the game, I feel, until like three-fourths of the way through the season. So it should be interesting to kind of see where this team ends up because I do feel like they have a lot of good players where if they can figure out how to play the game with those 5 players, they can go far, especially around Octane, who is probably the best AR, maybe. At least last year he was probably the best AR. There's a couple names you can throw into there, but if they can build around him, maybe we'll see kind of how far the Surge team gets. And I mean, they do have a good coach, so I feel like this is a team that can work really, really well together. And I think it might just take some time for them to figure out how they want to play the game that will net them wins.
Um,
One thing I do think they'll definitely struggle at though is search and destroy.
Oh, they will 100% struggle in Search and Destroy. This is a historically bad Search team. Aside from Octane's performance last year, where he was able to just completely beam people left and right in Search, and his ability to be in the right place at the right time at the beginning of the map, even as indicated by his first blood, first death statistic, which is at a 219, crushing 219. Um, Octane will not be enough to really get this team going. Um,
Yep.
I think
Octane has a couple of stats that really stand out. One being that first blood, first death ratio, where everyone else is below a 1.0. as well as his time in the hill, which was just astronomically large at 103 seconds on
Jeez,
average in
over
the
a
hard
minute
point,
and a half in the point. You really have to sit in the point to get over 100 seconds in
which says
CWL.
something, I think, about 100 Thieves' playstyle last year, which might have cost them some wins.
Yeah,
Since I think the way to play hardpoint is not just having one guy piggyback all the points in the hill. It needs to be a team effort.
I think that's a big thing here in Modern Warfare as well. This hill time, you aren't going to see a lot of people gather up all the hill time. It's more of a fluid play style. You're going to have guys go in and out, and it's going to be like there's maps that there are points on the map that you need spawns on, and there's no way in the world you can get broken out of if you have a really good spot. So in those maps, it matters less on about who's on the hill and more about who's outside of the hill in the right spot at the right time. So
Yep. So
yo,
I
go ahead.
see. Yeah. Yeah, you finish up your thought. I was going to go somewhere else.
So I think the big thing is that you're we're probably gonna have a pretty weak hard point in this team. Search and destroy. If Octane can keep playing at the level Octane's playing at, they could have a chance. But you have Karma, Enable, and Slack, who are all gonna probably want to play the objective. Apathy is just really didn't do anything last year. And don't get me wrong, Apathy has been a historically good player. Um, I just this roster feels like there's going to be changes. Panda and Proto probably will find their way into games every now and then, and when they do, it's going to be really make or break. I think that Panda could potentially be the star that they need, um, but he's still young and it's still really hard to tell. There's a lot of potential though.
Yep. Kind of how I see this going is Octane's going to be good from the start. Karma's going to be good from the start. Karma actually last year did really, really well during the Pro League. I mean, just all across the board, above average in like every statistical category. Outside of that, like first blood, first death percentage, but everything else was stellar. I mean, his KD in Search and Destroy was a 1.11, ranked 22nd out of the 101 players. Damage per minute in Hardpoint was at a 482, which is 21st out of the 101. Like just all across the board, he was very good last year during the pro season. And so I think it was just like a couple of events where he just had off days. Uh, so that kind of just cost the team some wins in the end.
Yeah,
But I
whenever
think
your off day is COD champs on Sunday,
yeah, it's kind of a
doesn't really
bad day to
sit
have
well.
it.
You
Yeah,
and Karma, while he's had some really clutch moments in his time, um, his ability to clutch now has definitely decreased a lot. His consistent play is very good, but whenever it comes down to the wire, I don't depend on Damon to make the big play.
yeah.
Um,
Which I think being a consistent player on this team could be fine. And I think why it's because you have apathy on it, who at the end at least will be able to be kind of the player to make up for that. So I think at the beginning of the season, what's going to happen, you're going to have Karma and Octane who are going to be fine. Then a little way into the season, Slack's finally going to figure out the game. And then they'll be kind of a middle of the pack team. And then at the end of the game, all the players are going to get it. Apathy and Enable are finally going to turn online. The whole team's going to come together and they'll do top four, somewhere in the top four.
I
Uh,
that's pretty high praise. You know what, I could see them being a top five team, um, moving forward, and I would say that um I would say that they had the potential for it. I just think that, you know, they probably have a lot to work on right now, and
yep, definitely.
I would see their record being pretty bad in the beginning because of it. So,
But
uh,
speaking about a lot to work on, let's look at
oh,
a team that has a lot to work with the Toronto Ultra. The only
Toronto.
coach of notable notoriety is Marky B, who's the strategic coach.
Yeah, you're definitely really
So
high on him.
he'll be there with his suitcase, helping the players out where need be. Don't know how much of in-game coaching he'll do. I know he's in the team scrims with them, so I imagine he's giving some advice here and there since they do have a good number of pretty young players on their roster. We'll start with the veteran though, with Looney and Methods. They've been around quite a while, as well as Lucky. He's pretty well known in the Spanish scene. Some of the younger players though, we got Brack, Metals, Mayhem, Cammy, and Kleenex, and then rounding it out with some more veterans of Classic and Bance. So this one's the only roster with 10 players to it. So I'm not actually certain who's going to be starting outside of Looney. I imagine Looney 100% would be a starting player, as well as Brack. Outside of those two, I'm not so sure, and probably Methods is going to be on that starting lineup. Actually, I believe so, since I've seen some tweets about their scrims against Atlanta as well as other teams. So probably Looney, Methods, Brack, and then any of the other players probably to round it out. Honestly, if Brack isn't on there, but we know for 100% Methods is, then it's probably going to be Cammy in the AR role, since I can't see any of the other players really running an AR to the efficiency of those two players, at
Oh,
least
absolutely
based
not.
off of some of the statistics from last year.
Rack was absurd last year. I mean,
Yep.
134 kill death, first overall hard point kill death of 126, second overall kill death in search and destroy. Rack is as close to a complete package as you could possibly get, and he should be the anchor and the focal point of this roster. Um, I'm very, very high on Brack, and Toronto is lucky to get Brack. Um, I will say that having 10 players to pick from and having substitutes that you can kind of pull in and get the ebb and flow will kind of close up consistency. Hopefully Marky B can kind of pick that up, and I'm sure that he's a decent enough person, like a people manager, to really take these 10 players, put a five together that will be successful. Um, that being said, everybody else is kind of here, there, hit or miss, middle of the pack, and a lot of them.
Methods was really good in World War II, so it should be interesting to see how good he is in this one. He's notably an extremely slow AR player. And then you have Brack and Cammy, who are more aggressive ARs, I would say, with Cammy being the most aggressive of the three. So if Methods is definitely on the starting lineup as that super slow AR, I think he'll work well with maybe one of the faster ARs, since they can kind of work together.
I think Methods is gonna do really really well in this Call of Duty. I think this damage efficiency is gonna play in the favor of these slower ARs because of the time to kill is just so fast. Comparison to Black Ops 4, Methods has the actual worst um damage efficiency rating out of any player that we've statistically polled. But he's traditionally a search and destroy mastermind. I don't know what happened last year with
Is
Methods.
he a search and destroy mastermind?
That's why Optic picked him up from World War II. I
Okay, I
he's
didn't know he had that.
he's got that edge. He has that mentality, and he um scraps. Just they knew how to read the what was happening and make the adjustment. So they can really find benefit if Methods becomes more of their like team captain almost. And him or Looney wouldn't go amiss in that kind of role. Um, both of them had kind of off years last year, middle of the pack, but I mean Toronto could be good. It just depends on how well they manage their 10 players, and I can't imagine a better coach to do it than Marky B. Um,
Yep.
this could be a good team. We'll see. I think that there's a clear top three or four teams, and then everybody else is kind of, if we put them at the bottom, we put them in the middle of the pack. Um, that's all pretty subject to change, and really just depends on how well the team clicks. So, I'm pretty excited to see how well this team does this year.
Yeah, I think it should be interesting, especially with their 10-man roster. I think it should be interesting to see who they put in for the Minnesota and if they change that up for the next event in London. But yeah, it should be a good time, I think. And so, with that said, having gone through all the rosters, finally, I know it it is time to put them in where we think they will end up at the end of the season based off maybe their lowest to their highest potential.
Well,
And
Nick,
so
do
I
you want to?
see I see you've already started putting some in.
Yeah, I've
Do
already.
you want to start do you want to start from the bottom and go up, or do you want to start from the top and go down?
I think if we both say what our like 12th spot is and then and make our way up, then I think the number one will be even more of an exciting reveal at the end.
Okay. All right. So in my number 12 spot, I'm having the Paris Legion.
And honestly, I couldn't fault you for that because I have them at 11, but I really do think that the LA Gorillas are they're bad. Like it's it's pretty hilarious how bad this team is. It's clear that there's not enough money to go around to really put together a good team, and the roster just is just not there.
I think I just have like a little more faith in kind of the players and maybe the coach than I do in Paris. Uh, I mean, all the players on Paris, you haven't really seen or heard their names outside of like last year, and last year they weren't even all that impressive. So I put like maybe a little more stock in some of the names on Gorillas, and who knows, maybe like some for some reason it works. I mean, Aches and Lacefield, they did take down Optic and Black Ops 3. Who knows
Who
what
knows?
crazy stuff will happen throughout the season, but
True.
that's kind of like why I have Paris at the bottom in the 12th spot.
All right. Well, who do you have for your 11th spot then?
For my 11th spot, I'm gonna have to I'm gonna have to put the LA Gorillas in. So
um,
we just swapped our 12th and 11th spots.
I really do think that those are both by far the worst teams, and everything else is going to be pretty difficult from here on out.
Yeah.
Those two are just markedly the hands down worst teams coming into the CDL season. Would you like to
After
go with your
them,
10th?
after this is hard, man.
I
This is
know.
actually a lot harder than I thought it would be. I'm gonna I'm gonna put Toronto down there at the 10th spot.
Okay.
I think they have a 10-man roster, and they might be pretty good currently, but I think once you get towards the end of the season, teams are really going to figure them out, and I don't think they have the talent to make up for it, and they might just try to like shore up for that once teams figure them out. Try swapping in players um, that weren't on the starting lineup, and it will just come back to bite them because then they'll mess up maybe like chemistry or how the team's been working, and they'll have to like start from square one. And so I feel like that's why Toronto is going to be down in 10th.
Um, I definitely see that Toronto could be. I think they have just too much to work with. I think Marky B, he can get them going, but I just don't know where um where it's gonna end up. And I don't think that I don't think that Toronto doesn't belong in the bottom, but I'm gonna go with Florida because I think that uh Florida, there's just not enough content with them out right now. Only having five players and a coach is going to hurt them in the long run. They need to pick up subs. They need to start working on what they have going for them. Caesar Skies, Havoc, and Mox, I think they're all, decent players and everything. They're going to have to carry Frosty regardless, and I think that that's not going to work for Optic Gaming LA, then it's not going to work for Florida. And I think that, at least with Optic, they have four superstars to carry JCap, and Florida has arguably two. So that's why I put Florida down in the 10th spot.
I put Florida at my ninth, just above Toronto. I put them there because I feel like they have three really good players and then two pretty good players. Where I feel like actually they have two average players, I would say. Uh, Rosini, it's interesting. I wouldn't say he's an average player, but it's just kind of
I
if
mean,
he can find his role with the team, it will work. Frosty, I'm a little more skeptical on. I think he's relatively average, and then the other three players I think are good. At least they were last year, so it's kind of a really big question mark as to whether they'll be good this year. I don't think they'll be as good, which means they'll have a team of like three decent players, not like really good, but decent players, one good player, and then one average player on their team. So I put them ahead of Toronto for that reason, since I think Toronto they just got a lot to work with, and it can either help them or it can really bite them in the butt. Whereas Florida, they only have those five, so they'll be using that five throughout the whole year, and I think that team coordination can help them, and actually will put them above Toronto in the end.
okay, and I think that does give a point to Florida. I mean, I think that's a different perspective to the five man. But I had Toronto in the ninth spot. I think that having more players and more flexibility will allow the roster to do more, and that's really the big difference between Florida and Toronto. Is one has a lot of players and they can that can either positively or negatively affect the team, and the other one, like as far as their starting team goes, they're really pretty much the same, like pretty much the same. How about your number eighth seed?
So my eighth seed, I got OGLA.
Oh man, you just made a lot of people upset.
I got OGLA there because unless JCap shows up, they're literally playing 4v5 and they will lose 4v5 against any of the other teams because any of the other teams actually can beat a 4v5. I
True.
think the other teams below them will lose a 4v5. But I
Um,
think OGLA can't win 4v5 against it's just like come on, he was so bad last year. I
yeah,
if
that's true.
I
JCap
think
was bad.
yeah, if he's as bad as he was last year,
No, they
they
have no
won't
chance.
make it past 8.
They have no chance. Um, I have Minnesota in there. Um, I'm not as I'm not super high on Optic because I do think JCap's a pretty bad player, but they do have two good subs that go into the rotation. Minnesota, there's just a lot of question marks that I see. It's not that they have like a terrible they have a terrible roster. I think Minnesota's got a pretty decent roster. Um, I think that it's going to be more difficult for them because they, while some of them work together, who knows how well Saint is going to be able to bring a team that has, has a lot of really, really strong personalities on it and bring it to something that, can have some fruition. And Saint, obviously, when he made the change from E United to Midnight, he went from a losing E United team to a losing Midnight team, and both Midnight and E United, um, in the previous halves that didn't have Saint, did really well, and then whenever they picked up Saint, they did markedly worse. So that's why I have Minnesota at number 8.
I have Minnesota at number 7.
Well,
So I'm only one step higher. I do agree with a lot of the points. Saints is definitely a huge question mark on if he can bring this team together. But I do think the players that they have and this game will work really, really well for them. As well as I don't think they really have a substitute. They got two. They got Exceed and Tiny, but I don't know how much those will be subbed in. I think they have a bunch of players that aren't going to be selfless or selfish, whereas I feel like or have a big ego where I feel like you can have some of those on the OGLA team. I feel like this team is kind of will actually listen to Saints. I feel like a lot of these players are very coachable players, and will even if maybe he's not right. This is why I feel like a lot of this team success actually falls onto Saints because
yeah,
I feel like he has a lot of players that will actually listen to what he is saying and will follow kind of the game plan that he writes.
I think they'll
And I
do that to a
feel that a
degree,
sim
though.
can fill in any holes
Yeah,
that
that's true.
you might find.
That's honestly why I have Minnesota ranked 8 and not lower because a sim will be able to do a lot of things that the team just needs. I think that Saint really needs to come out of the gates really strong so that way he can maintain that control over the team. If they start losing now, the team will just fall. And yeah, I couldn't agree more with Minnesota being kind of middle of the pack, which is where I have Seattle at the number 7 spot. So I think that Seattle's kind of in the same boat. You know, we have a bunch of guys that know how to play Call of Duty. Clearly, we have guys that have names, but they weren't ever like the superstar on the team whenever they played. Aside from Octane, who did very well last year, had some MVPs of events, namely the first one that 100 Thieves won. Um, will that be enough? I think that putting them about average is how I feel about it. All right, on to number 6.
All right. Well, this is where we differ a lot. From
Yeah.
6 up, we start to differ quite a bit. Actually, I guess you could say from 8 up, we start to differ quite a bit. But I got the London Royal Ravens at number 6. I really like this roster. I think it's really good. They got a bunch of really good players. But for some reason, when I look at their names, I look at what they can do, I don't feel that they'll be able to beat any of the teams above them. And I don't really have too much to back that up aside from calling it a bit of a hunch that they're not going to make it past sixth by the end of the season. Maybe they'll end up in fifth if one of my other teams that I have above them doesn't do too well. At most, I could see them getting fourth. I can't see them getting past fourth. And so I have them at sixth. Especially a lot of this, I think, depends on where they're practicing. If they're practicing in London, they're definitely not going to get better than sixth. If they come to the U.S. to practice during the season, then I can see them maybe moving up a spot or two. But I definitely don't see them breaking top three at all throughout the season.
Um, yeah, that's the exact reason why I put Optic Gaming LA in the 6th spot is because, they have a bunch of great players on the roster. It looks like a great roster. Um, but there is question marks, especially in the JCap position, where it's very difficult for me to put them at a high spot because they're gonna have to work hard to try and figure out how in the world to use JCap, or they're just gonna get rid of him and put in Gunjar or Chino. So um, I think that that's gonna be the big make or break for Optic. But I'm still pretty high on them because Dashy is just that good, and Slasher is that kind of leader that they need in order to really utilize the full potential of TJ Haley and Kenny.
Okay. So at the fifth spot, I have the Chicago Huntsmen. I
Ooh,
think the
man.
Chicago Huntsmen are really good. I think they'll be really good for a while until everything implodes. And that is why I have them at fifth.
Um, I I'm not sure that implosion's going to come anytime soon, but it could happen. I mean, it did happen with Optic with Formal and Scump back in the day. I think that partially was due to Scump being in LA and not having the best internet. Now he's
It
got
happened last year on Luminosity. They subbed out Gunless for an event to play with Ricky. How bad
That's
must
true.
the situation have been for you to sub out Gunless to put in Ricky?
I'm not sure how Formal feels about all of that, but I'm guessing that there's got to be a backstory to it. I don't know. I mean, it's Luminosity. They don't have as big of a fan base as Optic or FaZe or 100 Thieves. Um, but I think that there's probably a story behind that. And seeing Formal be with be with Gunless again kind of gives you a little bit of hope that maybe there's something more to it. In fifth, I have London Royal Ravens. I originally had the subliners there, but I did have to agree with your points on the big question marks and kind of they're proven. Don't get me wrong, they're proven, but they aren't proven as a team yet. And I think that they also got a late start, not as late as Paris or LA Gorillas, but they did get a later start, and that's going to hurt them as well.
All right, third, I got Seattle, or fourth, I got Seattle.
which is a huge difference from mine. Mine was at
Yep.
seventh.
So I think Seattle is going to be a top 10 team at the start of the season. Then at the midpoint of the season, they're going to be a top 6 team. And then at the end, they'll be top 4. When everything comes together, Enable and Apathy finally learn how to play the game again right before we switch games. And for that reason, I think they'll be fourth by the end of the season. Maybe not in the regular season, but at champs, I think they'll end up getting fourth
Yeah, I'm kind of curious.
because of all the early season losses, obviously.
I'm kind of curious to see how the league responds to the major events and everything, and how events like Minnesota weigh into your overall standing. I do think that Seattle is, I think Enable and Apathy both are going to be late bloomers into this game. Um, will I say that they're fourth? Obviously not. I had them at seventh, but you know what? Like I said, a lot of this is up for contention. I think the top three or four teams that we have are pretty similar, but I think a lot of this is up for contention, except for the very last two teams. At fourth, I have the Subliners. I'm pretty high on this team, and you're even higher on this team. Uh, they're a really complete package, and I would put them higher if I didn't feel better about the next three teams. Um,
Yeah. So I I have New York at third. You could easily if so it, you could easily swap them with where I have Chicago if Chicago doesn't implode.
True.
Uh, but I think New York's a really good team. I like the players. I think by the end of everything, the roster will really have come together. I think at the beginning of the season they might struggle with Zuma's kind of like play style and everything, but I think towards the end of the season, especially as the season goes on, I trust RJ to bring together some really good stats as he is the analyst that I think will help the team a lot. Since I think as the league goes on, you can just kind of start to see certain things in those numbers that show how teams like to play, where teams are failing at the game, and I think that can really help New York, especially when that data keeps on getting added and onto. Since kind of these events are tournaments that are the regular season, so there's going to be even more data for the top teams since they'll be going deeper into those each weekend. So I think that will really, really help New York, and I trust Revin to kind of put this team together at the end, as he kind of did with EG towards the end of the season. They really came together, and they could have been E United. They should have been E United.
Yeah, it was a
They
pretty
were very close to being E United
pretty
at champs,
close.
and who knows how that would have turned out.
I would imagine that it that we would have probably seen a Hundred Thieves team if Hundred Thieves had taken first. But that's my speculation. I agree with a lot of the points you're making about New York. They are very, very solid. The team is insane. The names that are on the starting lineup are superstars in each of their own accord. A lot of them have chemistry together prior to the CDL. Um, I I definitely wouldn't disagree with putting New York top four, and you put them at third. So more power to you. I have at third Atlanta FaZe, um, which I know that we're also going to have a point of contention on. Um, I think Atlanta's great. I think that Simp is going to come out and still do exactly what he was doing last year, and just being an overall terrorist in the mid map. And whenever you're able to do that, and you're able to have the quickest lane available to you on a lot of maps, um, that's huge. And they're gonna be able to move quickly because of it, and they're gonna be able to play the pace, or they're gonna be able to like set the pace of every game. And I think that's a big, big, big part of FaZe's game plan already. They're already, it's a very close scrim whenever you talk about any of these top four teams, and FaZe is always gonna put up a fight regardless of, where they're at. And yeah, I'm very excited to watch this FaZe team really tear it up this year. And I think that at third, they're gonna have a lot of firepower.
Okay. At fourth, I have the Dallas Empire, and I have the Dallas Empire at two because I have Atlanta FaZe at number one. I think we can probably show, unless you want to talk about why you got Chicago at number two. I think probably the biggest talking point here is why where we have Atlanta and Dallas at the end.
Yeah,
I already told you why I have Chicago at five. It's because I think they'll implode by the end of the season. But
I'm not so sure about it, and I'll go ahead and talk about why I have Chicago too. I'm not so sure about it. From watching their scrims, they seem to have a really, really good head on their shoulders. Formal is playing out of his mind right now. I mean, he's doing things in this game that, nobody else is doing. He's really a pioneer for the main AR position. RC's and Gunless seem to be, just hitting that chemistry stride, and I'm pretty impressed with their gunplay. Envoy is just Envoy. Kid's lights out 99% of the time, and you follow it up with Scump, the goat. He really brings a different kind of vibe to any team that he's on. And with him and Hex, I'm pretty confident in their ability to kind of keep things together with this new sort of Hex lineup. So that's why I have Chicago at number two, um, and I obviously have Dallas at number one. And we'll talk about why Dallas is one of the best teams in CDL. We'll go ahead and start with you, Nick.
okay, so I have Dallas at number two. I think throughout the entire season, they're going to be a solid team. They're not going to have any lows. They're not going to have, well, they'll always be high, but I don't think they'll be the highest. I think uh, at the start of the season, they'll be a little worse than maybe Atlanta and maybe some of the other teams. I don't think they'll ever lose to Chicago simply because of chips on Crim's shoulder. I don't think
I don't
they'll
even think
ever
you
lose
call
to
it
them
a
for that
chip
reason.
at this point. It's
Revenge
yeah,
on
he's
his
on a
mind.
revenge tour.
But I think Dallas will probably hit their stride in the mid to late season, but I don't think they'll ever beat Atlanta at the end of it. And the reason being, uh, Dallas doesn't have a coach. Dallas doesn't have a coach. They have five stellar players. Atlanta's got five stellar players, but Atlanta's also got a coach. Atlanta's going to be lights out at the beginning of the season. They'll fall off a little towards the mid and the end, but at the end of it all, they're going to be the top team. Why? Because they have a coach. And they'll be able to fix all of their mistakes because he'll be seeing every one of their mistakes and they'll be able to he'll just tell it as it is and they'll be able to fix it. Also, you got a bunch of creative minds on the team. You got five creative minds on this team. They're going to be able to mesh all their ideas into a little big mixing pot, and then you got Crowder above it with his ladle pulling out all the best ideas and slapping it on a whiteboard.
Yeah, I think
Whereas Dallas, you got two creative minds and then three really good players.
I you know what, and I can't agree more with having a really strong coach. And Crowder really proved himself whenever he took the 100 Thieves team to barely qualifying for the Pro League to the second best team of the season last year. However, Dallas had the first best team of the season with Clayster. Clayster can really, 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 really influence the overall vibe of a team along with Crim Six. I think both of them are going to work really, really well together. I think they have both kind of a strong personality that can actually work together. A lot of times you'll see that, and you'll see that they won't work together, kind of like how Formal and Crim Six were back before the Optic Dynasty fell apart.
Yeah.
Um,
Who was the standout player on E United? It was Simp. Who was the standout player on Optic Gaming last year? It was Dashy. Who was the standout player on 100 Thieves? It was Priesta and Octane and probably Slasher.
yeah,
But
I mean, there's a lot of really good players on 100 Thieves. They really should have.
you got two of those players on Atlanta, plus
True.
Celium, who was phenomenal,
Yep.
along with Abizi, who was really good on E United. And then you got Major Maniac to round it up, who was just all around consistently good player on Gen G.
That's true. Yeah, I've never been a hater on Major Maniac. I think he's a phenomenal player. I will say that I think Dallas will be a little bit stronger than every other team coming out the gate just because of the work ethic. Um, and I think that they have the mentality and the drive to keep that momentum going. Um, like I said, the top three, top four even are completely up for contention. There is not one team here that couldn't be the number one team,
Yeah.
other
I
than
don't think I
Paris
don't
and
think
Pelicans.
Dallas will have a better I don't think Atlanta's work ethic will be any worse than Dallas's though. I think they're all really young players and they all still love the game and want to play the game. So
Yep,
I don't see Dallas beating them on a worth ethic, maybe focus. Dallas will probably have some more focus than Atlanta.
true.
Uh, but I do think Dallas will be better than Atlanta at one point in the season. I just think at the very end, with everything Atlanta has, uh, all of its resources, all of its players, its coaching staff, everything, they will be better than Dallas at the very end.
Yeah, I think you just made a lot of FaZe Clan players happy, and I couldn't agree with more with what you're saying about Atlanta. Atlanta's a very very good team. Um, I I don't think I could change this top three. I think that they're all in the top three, and on my side of Dallas, Chicago, and Atlanta, who's going to be on number one? It could be very very difficult to tell. Um,
Yep.
well, if you want to head over real quick to the Minnesota CDL matches, we'll go ahead and put in our predictions.
All
And
right.
so
Well, we
at
can talk about each one and go down. But we'll start it off with Friday's matches. We got Chicago and Dallas, Seattle versus Florida, and LA Gorillas versus the Minnesota Rock or
Rocker, that's
Rock.
kind of fun to say. So first of all, starting off really strong with the Chicago Dallas matchup. This is what everybody wants to see. Everybody wants to see Scump and Crim go at it. Uh,
Viewership's going to be at the 200,000s, then it's going to drop down to 40,000
yeah,
after
and
that
then get
match.
to LA and probably have about 10 viewers. So um, so Chicago Dallas. I think Dallas is going to come out on top. Uh, I'm I'm pretty confident in that. Yeah, sorry. I'm gonna say it'll probably be 3-1 Dallas.
3-1 Dallas. Okay.
I
I
think
think it's going to be 3-2 Dallas as well.
okay.
I think Dallas is going to take it, but I think it's going to be a 3-2.
Yeah, and it definitely could come down to the wire, game five. That would be what the people want, and I really do think that Dallas is going to go in there and get the job done. I think they're going to drop the domination round because I feel like I feel like while they are prepared for it, I feel like domination's kind of a crapshoot in this CDL. And it's pretty obvious that a lot of the teams aren't even practicing Dom as much as they are Search and Hardpoint. But yeah, so I think that Dallas will drop the Dom and easily clean back up with that Hardpoint coming into the round four.
Okay. I'm actually so if Chicago is team A, meaning they get to pick the first hard point. What do they pick? They pick the first hard point. They pick the domination, and then they pick the last S&D.
Yeah,
I think is what it is.
yeah.
Um,
If it's like old CWL, that's how it works.
yeah. If it's that way, I think if Chicago's team A, I think they'll lose 3-1. I think they'll win their hard point and then they'll lose three straight. If Chicago is team B, that's where I think it's. I would get a little more in depth. I think if they're team B, that's where it will go 3-2 to Dallas, uh, where Dallas will take the first hard point, Chicago lose it, or Chicago wins the S&D, Dallas takes the Dom, Chicago takes the hard point, and Dallas takes the S&D. I don't see a scenario in where Chicago takes Dom. I feel like between Clayster and Crimsix, they probably have like a better understanding of that game mode. I don't know why. That's just
No,
what I'm feeling.
I get it. And honestly, like I said, Dom's kind of a crapshoot, so it could go either way. But I'm pretty confident that Dallas is gonna take the win this Friday night. Seattle and Florida. I'm pretty confident that Seattle is gonna do pretty well against Florida. I see you already put 1-3. You beat me to it. Um, I I think that they're probably gonna drop the first search and then come back with some pretty solid hard point performances. I'm
Oh,
pretty
so
happy.
you think Seattle's gonna win?
Yeah, I think. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think Seattle's gonna win. I think Seattle's gonna win 3-1.
Okay, I think Florida's going to beat Seattle 3-1.
That's
I
impressive.
don't think Seattle started the season. I don't think Seattle's going to be good at the start of the season. I think it will take them a month or two to get into it, or not a month or two. I think it will take them a month to get into it. But then they'll be really good at the end of the season. But the beginning, man, the beginning's it's gonna be interesting. I don't know. We'll have to see. I
Yeah,
know
we'll have
I
to
know
see.
I know we'll get some good stuff out of Octane, but I'm pretty sure we'll be getting some good stuff out of Mox and Skies. So it'll just
Yeah, I really do
be
think that
interesting
Florida
to see how the rest of them kind of come together.
Florida definitely has a better search team than Seattle for sure, which is why I think that they will um, they will have no
I'm gonna
problem
change
winning this
mine. I'm
search.
gonna change mine to 3-2.
I genuinely think that that Florida has got a great search team. Um, I don't think I don't think there's anybody here, maybe the London Paris in this whole weekend where somebody's going to get 3-0'd. I think that a lot of the teams are very close to each other. So,
Yep.
um, last last game of the night, LA Gorillas Minnesota. I'm taking Minnesota 3-2. Be my first round 5. I think that both of them are going to feel the pressure to really break out. I think the LA Gorillas are. Oh, sorry. Let me do that right. I think that the LA Gorillas are going to they're going to put up a fight against Minnesota, but Minnesota, in the end, it's their home turf. They're going to take the win.
Yeah, it should be interesting seeing Aches versus Assault, since they used to be teammates, and I know Aches yelled at Assault quite a bit, since
Aches yelled at everybody. Let's be honest.
Aches did yell at everyone, but he likes to yell at his teammates that are doing stupid things the most. So that should be interesting to see if maybe there's uh, I wouldn't say bad blood, but like wanting to prove yourself to one of your old teammates.
True.
I think also Minnesota, they're going to have the crowd behind him, although maybe that will help Ake since he likes to have the crowd against him.
That's
But
true.
I think Minnesota will take it 3-1 in the end. I think Minnesota will win all of the respawn game modes, and the Gorillas may be able to take the S&D or maybe one of the respawns, but I don't see them taking more than a single map off of Minnesota currently. Especially since I think Minnesota's had a lot more practice than the LA Gorillas have.
They absolutely have, and I think it's going to show. I think the Gorillas are going to try to come out strong, and I think Aches is going to try and get something going. But I really think that Minnesota's got this one. And I'm glad you're in agreement with me. So we'll go ahead and start on Saturdays. We have New York Subliners against the London Royal Ravens to start Saturday off. And this is going to be one of the better matchups this weekend. I can already tell you that. I am not even confident in me saying this, but I'm going to go ahead and say that New York Subliners are going to win 3-2 over London Royal Ravens, but it could go either way. I know that it's going to go to a round 5 for sure. Like, there's
I'm
no
in
doubt in my
agreement with
mind.
it. I'm in agreement with that.
Um,
I think it's quite possible. I think it definitely could go either way, but I think New York will edge out London in the end.
I, I I I really think that New York is probably the more complete team than London starting out the gates. They have a little bit more practice than they do. But like I said, it could go either way. These are both two very solid teams in my eyes.
Yep.
Um, Toronto and Seattle. I'm going to go ahead and say that Seattle is going to go ahead and be 2-0 in this CDL season, but it's not going to be as easy as it was against Florida. I'm going to go ahead and put them at 3-2 Seattle. It looks like you're also in agreement with me with a Seattle win over
Yes,
Toronto.
I do think Seattle's going to beat Toronto surprisingly after I had them losing to Florida, but I did have Florida over Toronto in the rankings.
That's true.
So
I think Seattle has the easiest pool play matchups right now.
I
I
think
can't.
it's a lot easier for Seattle. It's going to be a lot easier for Seattle to play against teams with older players on them than it will
True.
be for them to play with newer players, which is a lot of what Florida's roster is. It's a lot of maybe not new players. Havoc's been around a while, but younger players compared to kind of the old guard on Seattle, who I think actually has the oldest average age of players out
Yeah, I was
of
about to say
all of the
they're all older guys.
rosters. Yep.
They're all really good though. They all still shoot straight, so
Yep.
quick reflexes and stuff. Next we have a real stunner. This is probably gonna be the match that I you know watch the least, but it's gonna be LA Gorillas and the Florida Mutineers. Um, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead out on a limb and say that it's probably gonna be Florida. I'm gonna say yeah, I agree with that. I agree with the 3-1 Florida. I'm just not really high on the LA Gorillas, and Florida at
Yeah,
least
I
has
think
a
all of the
serviceable team.
individual talent on Florida just outclasses all of the talents on the LA Gorillas. I think it's just more of a matter of if the talent on Florida can actually play together, and play the game correctly. I think that's probably my only concern at this point.
Yeah, it's gonna be it's gonna come down to chemistry. I still think that Florida has way more practice than LA Gorillas, so it's still gonna be a pretty easy win. And then we get to the first Optic Gaming match against Paris, which I'm still not pretty confident that there's gonna be any 3-0s, but I think it's gonna be a pretty comfortable 3-1 for Optic. Nick, you have our very first 3-0s. You want to go ahead and talk about why you think Optic is gonna dominate Paris?
Because Optic can beat Paris 4-5.
True.
They
Uh,
can. They like honestly, Optic could beat. They have too many good players.
they do. They
First of all,
really
to
do.
not beat Paris, and I think all their players just are good enough to bring out a 3-0 against Paris. Paris has like not practiced at all, to my knowledge, pretty much. OGLA has practiced and probably kicked it into gear quite severely since getting throttled at the beginning of the season, or beginning of the
Beginning of the
preseason.
preseason, yeah.
Yeah.
Funny how that
Uh,
works.
so even with JCap being potentially really, really bad, I think they can do fine. And I think at least him being on the map will, they can just throw him in the hill or something,
Yeah,
or at least have
he
him
could like
get
overextend
intel.
and take a flag or something
So,
to that effect. I really think that they're gonna drop the Dom because I just the Dom is gonna be a crapshoot every single game. Which is why I think that Dom shouldn't be in the CDL, but that's another time for another podcast.
oh yeah,
Um,
I'd love to talk about that. I got some game modes I love, dude.
but yeah, I think they're gonna drop the Dom and then come back and win another hard point. I think their hard point game is very strong. And then we have another stunner of a match to finish Saturday night with Atlanta Dallas.
Wait, this is actually a stunner.
This is actually like a fantastic matchup. Well, I
The
said that
Dallas matches are all really good this weekend. Like you
they
got Chicago Dallas and Atlanta Dallas. That's pretty much the predicted, most people's predicted like top three throughout the entire season.
yeah.
So
I think Dallas is gonna take it 2-3. I think that they're I could see it going either way, but I really think that Dallas has a lot of preparation going into this weekend, and I really do think that Dallas is gonna come out on top of Atlanta in the very first event.
that's me going the either way. I do think Atlanta's gonna take it over Dallas. As I said before, I think Atlanta's gonna be the best team out of the gate. I do know Dallas was really, really good, but apparently they took a longer break over the Christmas holiday than some of the other teams. So
Oh,
maybe they've fallen behind slightly compared to Atlanta. Who knows?
based on
Uh,
all those scrims that I'm watching, Dallas is just tearing people apart. So I do think this is gonna be a knockdown drag out. We're gonna see some stellar
yeah,
performances on
I
both
think
sides.
it will definitely go to game five, but who's got the better S&D players for a game five? That
That
would be Atlanta.
That's true. Atlanta with Celium and Simp will be able to really control it. It really does come down to who gets to pick the fifth map. If it's like a St. Petro, it'll go to LA, or sorry, it'll go to Atlanta. If it's even if it was like a Hackney, or sorry, Hackney is not in Search and Destroy. If it's Arklov, I think Arklov has a really strong Dallas lean. So it could go either way though, and I think it's going to be a round five for sure. It's going to be an absolute stunner of a match. Tune into that for sure if you don't watch any of the other CDL matches.
Yeah. And Dallas has been practicing S&D a lot. I know they got 1 and 2 in one of the S&D tourneys, probably about a month ago or something. But it should be a very, very good match. Definitely could go either way.
So go
I
ahead and
see you're already putting
start
that in.
with
I am in
Sunday.
agreement on that.
Uh, I
100% agreement.
I think that this is going to be our like my very first
Well,
3-0.
these are the Sunday matches, by the way. The
Yes,
first Sunday
Sunday
match
match,
is the London Royal Ravens versus the Paris Legion.
and London is just going to absolutely smoke Paris. It's so the thing is that this is going to be a huge European game. Um, I think that this is gonna. So, in order to really understand this, you really have to understand the history between England and France, and that goes for thousands of years. Like they have bad, bad blood. Um, that being said, I'm pretty sure that London came out of the gates prepared, ready to go. They are going to come in and they're just going to get the work done on Paris and just stun them because I don't think Paris is taking this anywhere near as seriously. I think
Yeah,
London's going to
well,
come
I
down
mean,
and spank them.
I got OGLA 3-0ing Paris, and London Royal Ravens has an actual fifth player.
True.
So I think they're definitely going to 3-0 OGLA. Which brings us, or not OGLA,
Paris.
Paris. Which brings us to the next one, which has OGLA, which I think they'll get 3-0'd by Chicago.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I you know what? I'll go ahead and put it at 3-1 just to have a little bit of point of contention. But I think that Chicago is hands down the way better team than Optic Gaming. I think that Scump and Hex are both have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder that the organization that they built with their bare hands and their blood, sweat, and tears is now not theirs anymore and it belongs to two kids. I think that has a lot to do with it. I think there's going to be a lot of bad blood. I think this is another really, really good match to watch.
I think
Um,
there's less bad blood between Chicago and OGLA than there would be between Dallas and OGLA. I think Crim6 has more of a chip on his shoulder with Dashy and TJ than
I,
Scump does.
I'm pretty excited to see what Crim Six does to TJ because he seems to talk a lot of smack against TJ Haley. So he's pretty mad about him. Dashy's still gonna do work, and I think you can't ever discount Dashy. But yeah, I think Chicago's just a more complete team. They have a lot more practice, and they've been winning. So for Newark and Atlanta, I think this one's gonna go 2-3 in a favor of Atlanta. So Nick, you have 1-3. What's going on with
Yes.
that?
I think it's going to be a 1-3. I think New York out of the gates isn't going to be as strong as a lot of people might think. I think a lot of people have been saying they're not going to be that strong out of the gate. Um, I think they'll be able to take a map off of Atlanta, either the domination or a hard point, but I don't think they'll get either S&D. As you also agree, they're not going to get either S&D
No,
with them winning at least the game 5.
no,
That
they're
might
not.
not be
They're
both
not.
S&Ds, but it means they're at least winning the last one that matters.
Now,
Uh,
I think New York's going to come out strong. They're going to win the first hard point. They're going to actually, I think they're going to win both hard points. Um, and I think that Atlanta is just going to dominate them in search. I would honestly not be surprised if they 6-0'd or 6-1 New York in search game. Like that's how
I think Atlanta will actually lose the domination. I think that's where they're going to lose. Domination, at least in my opinion, is a bit more of a slower game type than maybe like the hard point where you have to constantly be rotating to get to the point. Domination, you can kind of just rush out, cap the point, and hold it. And I think Zuma and his crazy whatever routes, his annoying play style will really benefit them in that game type as compared to others where maybe people aren't moving around as much. And I think like the more stationary ARs of New York with uh, accuracy and zero will be the reason why they're able to take the domination. But I think they'll lose the hard points.
I think domination's a really really hard game type to play, and I think that it's a really big crapshoot based on how your team's spawning and how the game responds, and there's a little bit of RNG that goes into that. But um, as far as like pure skill goes, Atlanta's definitely got the win on this. They could lose the Dom. They aren't losing the Surge. Plain and simple. And then the last game of the night, since it's Minnesota, they get the nice main event time against Toronto. I'm you know what, I'm actually not super confident in this matchup, but I'm gonna go ahead and go 3-2 in Minnesota's favor. Um, Minnesota is just a better team than Toronto, pretty simply put. I think Toronto's going to take a little bit of time to find their stride, and that in the end is going to result in some early major event losses. So I think Minnesota takes this. I don't think it's going to be an easy game for either team, but I think
Yep.
Minnesota takes this.
Yep. I agree. I think Minnesota will take it 3-2. I've been hearing a lot of things about Minnesota being a really good team. So I'm looking forward to seeing kind of actually how they perform. Uh, but I think they have the edge over probably Toronto, who I think probably had to spend at least a couple of days at the beginning of the season probably trying to figure out who they were actually going to start, and maybe they're still trying to figure that out. Who knows? Um, but with home field advantage in Minnesota being the first event, I think Minnesota's going to take it 3-2. It's going to be a close one though. Not
Oh
too
yeah,
sure.
I definitely think it's going to be a close game. All right, well that
Yeah,
wraps up next weekend.
yeah, that's all the matches. Should be fun to see how they actually span out and how the season goes. Probably going to be completely wrong. Who knows? Maybe Paris will be the number one team at the end of it all. Probably not, but that would be pretty funny since I put them at 12th, you put them at 11th. That'd be
Yeah,
pretty interesting.
I'd be pretty shocked at that.
Yep.
No pun intended. Um, so I think uh I think that this is going to be a pretty exciting CDL season though. I'm pretty excited for the first inaugural season of CDL. I'm really hoping that it really kicks off. I'm hoping that they learn from a lot from the Overwatch League and they take those mistakes as lessons learned and move forward to make a quality product that Call of Duty as an esport really needs to establish itself as one of the major esports in the world.
Yeah, couldn't say better than myself. I think it'll be pretty good. I'm really interested to see kind of how everything plays out, and going to be taking stats for myself so I can analyze what's going on with the teams and everything, which love to do. So
And I'll keep
should
trying
be
to
a fun
bring
time.
I'll keep trying to bring the next level meta strats that we're getting from Challengers Division, Pro Am, and even from the CDL, just to kind of better put uh, a weight to the stat. Because a lot of the times you'll see a stat and you'll be like, "Oh man, this guy's a good kill death player." But you have to really consider how they're playing the game. And even last year, you had teams like Optic that were slaying in the kill death, but they couldn't win a hard point, even though the other
Oh
team
yeah.
was doing
Oh
awful in
no,
kill
trust
death.
me.
It
I looked at some of those. Optic had a very poor hard point to kill percentage.
and
Like
and
hard point score to kill percentage.
I think that a lot of the times, that you gotta understand what the stats are actually meaning. So hopefully I can bring that
Yep.
to the audience, and I think together we're gonna make some pretty quality content. So if you guys like this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel for any more Call of Duty news and more podcasts coming up. Should be one right after the Minnesota event, and we'll probably talk a little bit about highlights and lowlights there. But for now, this is Kevin or Hubris.
Yep. And Nicholas or Shady Bacon. And that wraps it up. See you all next time.
See ya.